Chapter 1047. In the guest hall of the Bu Pavilion, there were a few more cultivators who came to help. Among them, Elder Lu Gong of Linqing Temple, Elder Ding Silu of Guangyuan Sect, and Elder Guiziliang of Beichen Sect had the highest cultivation. There were a few others who were only at the core formation stage, but they followed the sect's orders to deliver some treasured artifacts and pills. Even though these sects couldn't do much, they still took the initiative to send their disciples here when Blue Feather Pavilion was being pressured by the Southern Flower Sect. Yen Xia had to accept this favor as well. Sect leader Yen, Lu Gong said, "I heard that after Hu Sanquan and the others retreated in defeat, they are recruiting helpers from all over the place. They want to attack your sect's gate again. You must be careful." Yen Xia bowed slightly and said, "Many thanks for the information, Sect Master Lu. Even though my Blue Feather Pavilion is small and weak, we are not willing to be bullied and humiliated by others. If he refuses to let go, then we'll fight him to the end." Everyone in the hall nodded. They could all see that Blue Feather Pavilion was backed by the bright Nether bloodline, so they did not need to fear the South Flower Sect too much. Ding Silu said, "It's clear that the Southern Flower Sect is not in the right in this matter, yet they still force us to our doorstep. They've really gone too far. I'm willing to advance and retreat together with sect leader Yen." Everyone nodded in agreement. Yen Xia naturally expressed her gratitude again. LV Gong said in a deep voice, "Sect Master Yen, forgive me for saying too much. If Southern Flower Sect comes again next time, they should have a higher chance of winning. What's important now is to rearrange your sect's Mountain Gate Great Formation and Restrictive Formation." Yen Xia also felt that this should be the case. However, if they wanted to expand the Mountain Gate's Great Formation a bit more, this wouldn't be a simple matter. First of all, they needed an ocean's worth of precious materials, and secondly, they needed people who were proficient in formations. Right now, they were both lacking. Guiziliang smiled and said, "There's no need for that. No matter how sturdy your sect's Mountain Gate is, it won't be a good thing if news of it gets out after being besieged for so long. Why don't we set up an altar outside, just like how we dealt with the Devil Sect? This way, we can avoid damage to the Mountain Gate." LV Gong thought about it and sighed. Jinrengua's reminder is good. Yen Xia's eyes lit up as well. Blue Feather Pavilion had been attacked time and time again, and it was to chase away the enemies. However, if they could keep the enemy at bay, not only would they be able to avoid losses, they would also have more leeway to salvage the situation. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. There had always been spell altars. When they were fighting against the Devil Sect, the Qinsong School had erected an unknown number of them, forming a large and dense net around the northern lands. It was just that the Mystic and Devil sects had stopped fighting. Naturally, there was no need for such strict security. Apart from a few key areas that were guarded by cultivators, most of them had long been abandoned. Now that they were here, they could be used after some minor repairs. Since she did not know when the people from the University of South Flower would come looking for her, it was better to settle this matter as soon as possible. She ordered Yen Xiaoyang to greet the people on her behalf. She excused herself and went to the back to make arrangements. In the depths of the East Sea, however, there was a mountain range that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was precisely the mountain gate of the Heaven Mending Pavilion. Even though the Yuxiao School had broken a few small worlds and replenished the clear air, temporarily preventing it from falling, before the Taihao School sent the precious leaf over, it would no longer be able to float around. Thus, it could only float above the ocean. However, this also attracted a lot of trouble. Everyone knew that the Heaven Mending Pavilion was number one among all sects in refining treasures. Fortunately, they were fated with people and often gifted treasures to them. In a short period of time, people came in droves in search of treasures. After a long time, the cultivators of the Heaven Mending Pavilion were also extremely annoyed. They simply built many floating islands outside of the mountain gate and ordered a few elders and disciples to stand guard outside in order to send away the guests. After Taoist Yin parted ways with Hu Sanquan and the others, he left the East Flower Continent and rode a magical artifact all the way here. He stopped in front of a floating island and shouted from outside, "Is fellow Taoist Mao here? I have come to disturb you again." Someone inside happily said, "Is it fellow Taoist Ian? Quickly come in and talk." Taoist Ian entered the inner room. There was a middle-aged Taoist who looked to be in his 40s and had his hair tied into a bun. That person came up and grabbed his sleeve, saying, "Did you bring the Ling Zi grass that I asked fellow Taoist Ian to find last time?" Taoist Ian had a proud expression on his face. He took out a spirit herb with velvet leaves from his sleeve. Even though it was in his hand, when he waved it lightly, it looked like a feather that was about to be blown away by the wind. Taoist Mao's eyes immediately shone and he reached out to grab it. Taoist Ian sighed and turned to the side, taking the grass back. Taoist Mao panicked and said, "What do you mean, fellow Taoist?" Taoist Ian chuckled and sat down bluntly. He said, "I came here today because I have a favor to ask. If fellow Taoist is willing to help, this spirit herb is yours." Taoist Mao said, "What is it?" Taoist Ian said, "I want to ask fellow Taoist to deal with someone. Don't worry, this person isn't a disciple of a large sect. I heard that he's just a wandering cultivator, but his technique is strange. After thinking about it, I think only fellow Taoist can deal with him." Hearing that the other party wasn't a disciple of a large sect, Taoist Mao let out a sigh of relief and calmed down a little. He asked curiously, "What's so strange about that person's technique?" Taoist Ian explained Shindong's technique in detail. "This person's Xian Qi can destroy treasured weapons. We can't do anything to him, so we thought of fellow Taoist." Taoist Mao asked curiously, "If this person's Xian Qi can destroy treasured weapons, why not use mana?" Taoist Ian cursed inwardly. That was easy for him to say. His own treasured weapons were useless, but the other party could use them to attack. This was clearly a situation where there was no chance of winning unless his mana was so profound that the other party couldn't defend against it. But the problem was that the other party was already a second-layer cultivator. Unless one cultivated a Dharma body, how many people could win? After Taoist Mao asked the question, he also felt that it was inappropriate and felt a little awkward. He said, "I was thinking too simply, but all my skills are in the art of crafting weapons. According to fellow Taoist, I'm afraid I can't deal with this person." Taoist Ian said, "That's not difficult. Most of the treasured weapons in our possession were spirit treasures, which was why they were destroyed by him. But Bu Tian Pavilion has many treasured weapons, so I don't believe he can destroy them so easily even if we just take a few top-grade treasures." Taoist Mao said awkwardly, I'm afraid it won't be easy." Taoist Ian sighed. "Fellow Taoist Mao, I'm not trying to scare you. Don't underestimate this person. If we don't deal with him, he might bring danger to your school." Taoist Mao was confused. "Why is that?" Taoist Ian said, "If this person gets the support of the Qinsong school and passes on this mysterious technique, everyone will know how to destroy treasured weapons in the future. At that time, what's the point of your Bu Tian Pavilion refining treasured weapons?" Of course, what he said was not entirely true. It was extremely difficult to establish a school. Even if one was lucky enough to pass on a legacy, if one couldn't cultivate to the heavenly grotto realm, what could Bu Tian Pavilion do? Moreover, as long as one was prepared, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with any Taoist technique or supernatural power. If a cultivator with experience in the mortal world was here, they would immediately know that Taoist Yin's words were just an exaggeration. However, Taoist Mao had spent his entire life cultivating in Bu Tian Pavilion and rarely interacted with outsiders. After hearing what Taoist Ian said, he felt that it made some sense. He asked anxiously, "Then what should we do?" Taoist Ian stood up and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, you're the manager of Bu Tian Pavilion's Ning Pavilion. You have many powerful treasured weapons in your hands. Could it be that you can't even take one or two out? If you can kill this person, it will undoubtedly be a great contribution to your school." Taoist Mao hesitated for a while, but under Taoist Yin's persuasion, he finally agreed. "Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment. After I get the treasured weapons, I'll go with you to the Blue Feather School." He bowed and flew out of Floating Island, heading towards Bu Tian Pavilion's mountain gate. However, when he was halfway there, two beams of light suddenly flew towards him. He couldn't help but be startled when he touched them. His face lit up when he touched them. He bowed to the sky, then turned around and left. At this moment, in a palace in the sky, Bu Jingsu looked down and said, "Senior brother sect master gave those 2 treasured weapons to martial nephew Mao. Is it really fine?" Tan Dingxian said indifferently, "Those 2 weapons aren't weapons for killing, nor are they real treasures. So what if they were given to him? The Qinsong School's scheme almost caused our mountain gate to fall last time, so I'm going to let them suffer a bit too." Bu Jingsu smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. He sighed and said, "I hope they don't cause any trouble." Daoist Yin didn't wait for long before he saw Daoist Mao excitedly return. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "How did fellow Daoist return so quickly? Did you get the treasured weapons?" Daoist Mao patted his sleeves and said, "Don't worry, fellow Daoist." Daoist Yin's face lit up. He said, "Good, then we'll be on our way." Just as he was about to launch his escape technique, Daoist Mao stopped him. From his sleeve, Daoist Mao took out a jade tablet that was shaped like a boat and said, "Fellow Daoist Yin, I have the 10,000-li wavering light leap here. You only need to say where you want to go and it can take us there. Its speed is comparable to flying a letter." Daoist Yin said, "Since you have this, it'll save us from the trouble of running around. I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist." Daoist Mao said humbly and took out a spell. The jade tablet instantly turned into a 30-feet-long spiritual light that wrapped around the 2 of them. With a whoosh, it flew through the air. In less than 2 hours, the light had traveled from the sea to the front of Bu Pavilion's mountain gate. It finally landed on a deserted mountain top and the light faded away. It turned back into a jade tablet and landed in Daoist Mao's hand. He looked left and right, but there was no one around. He didn't see Daoist Yin talking about the same thing, so he sighed and said, "We came early." Daoist Yin's eyes were sharp, so he could see that a few miles away, there were dozens of cultivators repairing an altar and setting up a restriction. He didn't understand at first, but after thinking about it, he immediately understood their intention. He felt something was wrong and thought, if Bu Pavilion has set up a restriction on the altar, we'll have to attack them one by one if we want to force them to submit. We mustn't let them succeed. He pulled Daoist Mao's sleeve and pointed at the altar, saying, "Fellow Daoist, quickly break this place." Daoist Mao didn't understand what was going on. Under Daoist Yin's urging, he hesitantly took out a nail hammer from his bosom and threw it into the sky. With a loud bang, the top of the altar was smashed into pieces, and dozens of cultivators were killed on the spot. He didn't expect his attack to be so powerful. Seeing that there were people dying, he couldn't help but look apologetic and couldn't bear to see it. The people in Bu Pavilion were shocked when they heard the commotion outside. LV Gong, Ding Silu, and the others all flew out and saw Daoist Mao retrieving his nail hammer. When the 2 saw that there were only 2 people in front of them, they looked at each other and rushed over together. Daoist Mao had never fought with anyone before, so he was shocked when he saw the 2 of them coming at him. In his nervousness, he threw a treasure that he'd obtained just now into the air. Once the treasure was in the air, the surroundings suddenly darkened as if the sunlight had been sucked away. LV Gong and Ding Silu were alarmed. They looked up and saw a pearl hanging in the air, blocking the sunlight. The pearl's light was soft and weak. As they didn't know what the treasure was used for, they wanted to go around it. However, the light suddenly grew and shone on the 2 of them. The 2 of them felt dizzy and sleepy. Then they fell from the sky and rolled on the ground. In the floating heavenly palace, the clear sound of the bell rang and spread throughout the 3 halls. Zhang Yan knew that Qi Yuntian invited him and Huxian to discuss some matters. He sat still and blew out a breath of white air to form a clone. He then stepped on the cloud stairs and headed to the upper extreme palace. When he arrived at the door, Huxian was also there. They greeted each other and entered the hall together. Qi Yuntian was sitting on the cloud water jade platform. When he saw the 2 of them, he stood up and greeted, "Greetings, junior brothers." Zhang Yan and Huxian also greeted him. Qi Yuntian invited the 2 of them to sit down and said, "Junior brother Zhang, you wrote that Li Xiaomi has already achieved Grotto Heaven. In the future, there will be 3 people guarding the Southern Sea. Do we need to rearrange the details?" Zhang Yan said, "Although there are some differences with the original plan, there are only a few differences. It's not a big deal. We can let the 3 spiritual masters handle it. Qi Yuntian nodded. Tao and me had fought against Yu Xiao for a while, and they were already tied to Qitsang. Li Xiaomi was able to achieve the grotto heaven with their help, so he could be at ease using these people. Huoxian said, "A few days ago, I heard that Yu Xiao ordered a dozen small sects to go to the Southern Sea and build a restrictive spell altar there. Junior brother, do you think this is a problem?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I also heard about this. But the Southern Sea is vast. Unless they occupy the entire Southern Sea or send a heavenly abode to guard the gate, it will not be a problem for me." Ordering Tao, me, and Li Xiaomi to go to the Southern Sea was to restrain Yu Xiao and make him worry about his backyard at all times. If Yu Xiao really sent a heavenly abode to guard the Southern Sea, then Qinsong School would have achieved half of its goal. But if not, a dozen small sects would be useless in front of the 3 heavenly abode masters. They could be wiped out with a wave of their hands. After the 3 of them discussed for a while, Qi Yuntian looked at the 2 of them and said slowly, "Spiritual Master Lu's cultivation is reaching completion recently. I want to transfer him to the upper extreme hall as a guardian elder. What do you 2 think?" Zhang Yan's brows raised slightly when he heard this, and it wasn't difficult for him to guess that LV Junyang had already arrived at the barrier and intended to take that final step, so he required a place that was filled with spirit energy for him to cultivate. But he had never been one of the top 10 disciples in the sect. If he wanted spiritual opportunity, he could only go to the upper extreme hall. However, Qi Yuntian could not make a decision on this matter alone. This was most likely the intention of the sect master. He said, "What happened in the past has been settled. If Spiritual Master Lu can go to the upper extreme hall to cultivate, it will be a blessing in disguise. I have no objections." Qi Yuntian turned his head and looked at Huoxian. "Junior Hua, what do you think?" Huoxian did not answer immediately. Instead, he pondered. He understood that after Lu Junyang returned to the sect, he did not show himself in front of others. It was because Yen Chongqing had slaughtered too many people in the sect. Not only did he kill almost all of the top 10 disciples, he also killed a heavenly abode master. Even if this person was dead now, the knot in his heart could not be solved in a short period of time. Some people were even afraid that after Lu Juanyang's achievements in the future, he would come back to cause trouble for them. Qi Yuntian's intention was for him to use his position as the temple master to suppress this matter. After thinking for a while, he said in a low voice, "The temple master has no objections. P.S. This is strange. After using the keyboard for so many years, I can't even get blisters today." Chapter 122, Reopening the Altar Falling Mountain Pass. Chapter 1048. Taoist Yin saw Ding and Lu on the ground as if they had lost their minds. He was overjoyed and raised the lightning in his hand, wanting to kill the 2 of them. Taoist Mao panicked and stopped him, saying, "What are you doing, fellow Taoist?" Taoist Yin said, "Of course I'm going to kill these 2. Taoist Mao shook his head and said, No. It wasn't easy for these 2 fellow Taoists to cultivate to this stage. Furthermore, we don't have any grudges against each other, so how can I kill them?" Although he didn't understand the ways of the world, he wasn't stupid. He came here because he heard Taoist Yin's words to deal with Shandong, so he didn't want to become enemies with unrelated people. And NB% Taoist Yin thought that it was good not to kill them. With these 2 people in his hands, the other party wouldn't dare to harm them, so he said, "All right, I'll give fellow Taoists some face." He took out a human pouch from his sleeve, opened it, and released a white light, putting the 2 people inside. In front of the formation door, Guiziliang was a step behind. When he came out of the formation, he happened to see Lu and Ding being taken away. He knew that he would be at a disadvantage if he went alone, so he flicked his finger and released a paper crane to secretly follow them. He immediately retreated and told everyone about this. When the Yen siblings heard that Lu and Ding, 2 people were captured, they were shocked. Jiang Zheng said, "Sect Master Yen, don't worry. Since the person has captured the 2 fellow Taoists and hasn't done anything to them, it's obvious that he wants to use them to threaten us. If that's the case, we need to think of a way to save the 2 fellow Taoists." Yan Xiaoyang's expression changed. What if the other party used the two people's lives to threaten him and force him to go out and apologize? When he thought of this, he instantly became restless. He stood up and said, "I'll go and save the two fellow Taoists." Elder Yan, wait. Jiang Jing stopped him and said solemnly, "We don't know the person's route, so don't act rashly." He then asked Guiziliang, "Did fellow Taoists see where the person went?" Guiziliang said, "Just now, I'm chasing after them with a secret technique. The two of them haven't gone far and are still patrolling outside. They seem to be looking for a chance to break through my outer altar. Even if they escaped far away, it wouldn't be hard for me to find their resting place." Jiang Jing praised and asked again, "Did fellow Taoists see through that person's background?" Guiziliang described Taoist Mao's clothes and appearance. Jiang Jing pondered for a while and said, "From what fellow Taoists said, that person's robe seems to belong to a rumored heaven-mending pavilion cultivator. This person also used a rare treasure to win, so it's very likely that he's from this sect." Yan Xiaoyang said, "Why don't we go out together and rescue the two fellow Taoists?" Jiang Zheng deduced, "These two dared to linger outside your sect's mountain gate, so they must be confident in their art of escape. Even if we send more people, it might not be of any use, and we might even scare them away." Shen Tong said in a low voice, "My movement technique is passable. Why don't I go and see if I can catch up to these two?" Jiang Jing thought it was appropriate for him to go. Then, junior apprentice brother Shen, "You must be careful." Shen Dong nodded and asked Guiziliang where the two of them were before using his escape technique. The spirit-returning sect had several escape techniques, but the first one they chose had already been abandoned. Now, they were practicing the limitless roaming technique. Compared to the sword escape technique, it was not as good as the sword escape technique. However, as long as they spared no effort in using magic power, they could keep pace with it for a short period of time. Now, with his urgent urging, they found the two of them in a short while. Taoist Yin also sensed something. He looked behind him and pointed, saying, "Fellow Taoist Mao, this is the person I told you about earlier." Taoist Mao was about to meet the person in question, so he couldn't help but feel nervous. However, after the battle just now, he gained some confidence. With a wave of his hand, he took out a copper gong and struck it in front of him. Immediately, a loud sound rang out. Shen Dong let out a shout and unleashed his heavy qi. Instantly, a dense black qi that seemed like fog and smoke surrounded an area of 100 feet. Once released, his abyss-reflecting heavy qi could isolate light, sound, and spirits, so it was not afraid of the sound of the gong. However, after releasing this qi, the only flaw was that it could no longer move freely. However, it did not hinder him from retrieving treasures, so he threw a golden talisman straight at Taoist Mao's face. Taoist Mao was originally cowering, but when he saw Shen Dong take out a treasure to attack, his expression changed, and his eyes lit up. He was not afraid of competing with treasures at all. In fact, he could clearly distinguish the quality of his opponent's treasure with a single glance. With a wave of his hand, the talisman actually fell into his hand. Shen Dong shivered and was about to use his transcendence energy to summon it again, but Taoist Mao was quick. He grabbed the golden talisman with one hand and pressed on it with the other, immediately severing the connection in his mind. The treasure obediently stopped moving and was tossed into his sleeve, which was considered to be keeping it. Shen Dong could already determine that this person was definitely a cultivator from Butian Pavilion, or else he would not have such a method of controlling treasures. However, he was not afraid. With the protection of the abyss reflecting heavy qi, even if the opponent did not have a true treasure, they could not hurt him. Taoist Yin looked from the side and saw that Shen Dong was chasing them alone. How could he be polite? With a wave of his hand, he threw out dozens of lightning bolts. Shen Dong's heavy qi could subdue treasures, but it was a bad idea to use it against a person's magic power. Thus, he spat out a spiritual light that overflowed like jade and spread out like a brocade cloud. It circled around the top of his head, and a wonderful melody could be heard. If the spirit-returning sect only relied on one technique, they would not have been able to become the Great Eastern Victory sect of the ancient era. Their sect emphasized stability, attack, and power. This divine ability of his was called the swallowing great spiritual chi. As long as the opponent's power was not as great as his, no matter how much lightning, or fire he attacked, they would all be refined into nothingness upon contact. Taoist Mao saw that his precious gong was useless, so he put it away and switched to the large nail hammer. He raised it up and struck it down. However, when it landed on the heavy chi, it was as if it had hit metal. A muffled sound was heard, and the heavy chi sank inwards. After a few more cracking sounds, the hammer instantly shattered into countless pieces. Taoist Mao could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He hurriedly raised the precious pearl from before into the air, but after illuminating it for a long time, it did not have the slightest effect on Shendong. He could not help but be stunned. Taoist Yin also changed his methods in one go, but he could not break through the white cloud, let alone shake the abyss reflecting heavy chi. He subconsciously raised his treasures, but just as he moved his hands, he put them down with resentment. He urged, "Taoist friend, why don't you show me some other methods?" Taoist Mao scratched his head. He did not know how to fight without using treasures. After thinking hard for a while, he slapped his head and took out a small flag. He threw it outwards, and it turned into a flag gate. He then waved it in the wind. 1 turned into 10, 10 turned into 100, and 100 turned into 1,000. Countless identical flag gates appeared in the surroundings. Shendong wasn't sure what use this flag gate had, so he used his heavy chi to wrap around it, easily tearing it apart. However, when he looked around, there were still tens of thousands of them. They landed within a radius of a few miles, and it was not something that the Z family's magical power could handle. They could only sweep and destroy the 300 feet radius of the flag door. Taoist Mao, on the other hand, made an incantation gesture and shot out countless arrows from the flag gate. Shendong hurriedly used his chi to protect himself, but under the barrage of arrows, he was unable to move for a moment. Taoist Mao saw this. His face lit up with joy. It's done! Although the other party could shatter Dharma treasures, he was unable to distinguish between the real and the fake. In the 10,000 arrow flag gate, only one flag and one gate were real, the rest were fake. But whether it was real or fake, whether it was seen from the outside, or whether it was shooting or knocking, it was all the same. It was as if once this was activated, it could turn into millions of magic treasures, and if it used magic power to wear them down, it would be extremely difficult. But it wouldn't be long before they were used up. When that time came, he wouldn't have the strength to resist. At this moment, Shendong knew that the situation wasn't right. There was no reason that any cultivation method or divine ability couldn't be broken, not to mention that he had only just mastered this heavy chi. He hadn't mastered many of the methods that complemented this art. If he didn't have a way to break the flag gate, he would fall into a predicament if he persisted. He had to think of a way to retreat. Taoist Yin reminded him, "Fellow Taoist Yin, good move. Just don't let him escape. Once we capture him, we'll have one more plan in our hands." Shendong laughed coldly to himself. Did they really think they could keep him here? He waved his sleeves, and a letter flew out towards Blue Feather Pavilion. It would be best if the two of them didn't leave. When Jiang Zheng, Yan Xie, Guiziliang, and the others arrived, he didn't believe that they couldn't take them down. Taoist Yin saw it clearly and cursed silently. Knowing that there was no chance, he said, "Fellow Taoist Mao, let's go quickly." Taoist Mao reacted as well. He took out a banner and stuck it into the ground. Then he retracted the flag gate and leaped into the air, turning into a streak of light and flying away. Shendong wanted to try and stop them, but the banner waved and released a formless wave of true energy to stop him. This delay allowed the two of them to get far away. He knew that he couldn't catch up, so he could only retreat. After traveling for a few kilometers, Jiang Zheng and the others had already caught up. When the two sides met, they asked, "Junior brother Shendong, are you in any trouble?" Shendong said, "I'm fine." He explained the situation of the fight just now, then said, "Although I only exchanged a few blows with that heaven-mending pavilion cultivator, I could tell that he was a newbie. If he was alone, I was confident that I could capture him." Guiziliang said, "Don't worry, fellow Taoists. Those two haven't seen through my absorption technique yet, so it won't be hard to find them. Why don't we go back and discuss our countermeasures? Jiang Jing said, that's fine too. Since those two came to find me, they won't leave this place. Third senior sister will be here soon, so let's talk about it when she gets here. Everyone returned to the mountain gate. After waiting for less than 2 hours, they saw multicolored lights surging over from the clouds. A cloud raft flew over, and Wang Kaiwei was dressed in white. Behind her stood 2 cultivators, one male and one female. They were Yuan Yanhui and Wang Ziyuan. Everyone came out of the mountain to welcome them. They invited the 3 of them to their seats, and Yan Xia expressed her gratitude again. After Wang Kaiwei said a few polite words, she asked about the current situation. Everyone spoke one after another, and they explained everything clearly. Yuan Yanhui had fought with Shun Tong in private before, so she knew his abilities. When she heard that he couldn't capture Taoist Mao, and even almost failed, she couldn't help but be eager to try. She said, Spiritual Master Wang, why don't I go and fight with this person? Yuan Yanhui and Wang Ziyuan were recruited when Zhang Yan was in charge of the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu, so Wang Kaiwei wouldn't refuse. She nodded and said, then I'll have to trouble Spiritual Master Yuan. Wang Ziyuan said, I'll go with junior sister. Yuan Yanhui pouted and said, senior brother's movement technique is far inferior to mine. By the time you get there, I might have already captured those 2. As she said that, she stomped her foot, and a sword light flew out from her body. It wrapped around her body, and in an instant, a sword rainbow flew out. Everyone came to a sudden realization. It turned out that this spiritual master Yuan was a rare sword cultivator. No wonder he was so confident. Mao and Yin didn't retreat too far. They were prepared to destroy a few more spell altars, but after Biu Xian suffered a loss, they were also on guard. It wouldn't be easy to destroy the spell altars anymore. At this moment, a swift light suddenly flew over. Before the 2 of them could react, Taoist Mao was slashed. The robe on his body automatically protected him, and the sword light was blocked by a layer of soft light. Taoist Yin was so shocked that his face turned pale. Just now, if that sword had been aimed at him, he would have been beheaded. However, the sword master seemed to be a stubborn person. Seeing that his attack didn't work, he slashed a few more times. Taoist Mao finally came to his senses. He hurriedly threw out the precious pearl in his hand. Sensing that something was wrong, the sword master didn't wait for the precious pearl to rise into the air and flew away. In the blink of an eye, he was hundreds of meters away. Just as he was about to escape, he suddenly trembled and fell from the sky. After the light dispersed, a young girl dressed in purple and red was half lying on the ground. She tried to prop herself up a few times, but she couldn't get up. Taoist Yin was delighted to see this. This girl was a sword cultivator, so she must be one of the famous figures in the heavenly lake of bright nether. He immediately threw out the human sack and put her inside. After that, he was lost in thought for a moment. Then he slapped his forehead and let out a cry. Taoist Mao was shocked and asked, "What's the matter, fellow Taoist?" Taoist Yin stared at him and said, "If I knew your precious pearl was so powerful, I wouldn't have retreated just now. Who knows, I might have been able to capture all of them in one fell swoop." Taoist Mao was stunned, but he also felt that it made sense. The treasure in his hand was called the 8 Treasures Hanging Pearl. Within 100 meters, as long as one looked at the pearl, they would immediately become dazed and weak under the grotto heaven. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they would immediately faint. Those who didn't know his background really couldn't fight him. Taoist Yin said, "Let's just go all the way. Why don't we capture 3 people as bait and go to the front door to challenge them? I'm not afraid that they won't come out. When that time comes, it'll be up to you, fellow Taoist." Taoist Mao was instantly tempted. He said, Then let's give it a try." At the same time, on a green peak in Duguang Mountain, Hu Sanquan was led by a boy into a cave in the mountain. This place was filled with dense smoke, and the room was filled with fragrance. Behind the thick smoke, there seemed to be a person sitting cross-legged. Hu Sanquan bowed and said, "Greetings, senior brother Feng." That person's voice sounded, "Junior brother Hu, why are you looking for me?" Hu Sanquan sighed and told him about being attacked on the way. He said angrily, "Senior brother, that person is really unreasonable and he doesn't care about the disciples of the Nanhua sect. However, he is somewhat related to the bright nether heavenly lake, and we can't vent our anger, so we can only ask for help from senior brother." He knew that in terms of cultivation, this senior brother Feng of his was only a line away from eldest senior brother Do Hongping. If he could really ask for his help, then it would be easy to take down the people of the Blue Feather Pavilion. Even if the third stage cultivators of the bright nether heavenly lake came, he wouldn't be afraid. However, an unhappy voice came from within the smoke. "Don't come and drag me into the fight between you juniors." Seeing that he seemed to have the intention to send him off, Hu Sanquan couldn't help but feel anxious. He said loudly, "Senior brother, are you really not going to care about the friendship between fellow disciples? If you help, junior martial brother Feng will certainly be grateful to you. Now that he is favored by our benevolent elder, he will be able to speak up if there is any problem." The person inside seemed to have thought of something and did not speak for a long time. Then he threw out a branch and said, "You should know how to use it. This is enough to help you defeat the enemy. After taking it, don't come and bother me again." When Hu Sanquan saw the branch, he couldn't help but widen his eyes as if he couldn't believe it. Then he quivered and rushed forward to snatch it, saying repeatedly, "Thank you, senior brother. Thank you, senior brother." Only when there was no sound from the cave did he turn out of the cave abode, and with a flash of light, he rushed towards the Blue Feather Pavilion mountain. Chapter 1049. Mao and Yin returned to Blue Feather Pavilion. Taoist Yin saw that there was no one in front of the mountain, so he stood up and said loudly, "Sect Master Yen, I am Wanderer Yin Han. I am here at the request of Southflower's Hu Daoist to demand justice. According to the previous conditions, as long as your brother agrees to kowtow and apologize, and give us some good Ganjing, we will release the 3 enlightened masters. Please consider this carefully, Sect Master Yen." With that, he gave Taoist Mao a look, and the two of them retreated, waiting for a reply from inside. He was only a lower sect elder of Southflower sect. It would be fine if he was only an enemy of Blue Feather Pavilion, but he was worried that a cultivator of Bright Nether Lake was interfering. However, Hu Sanquan and the others were disciples of the Grotto Heaven, and they were friends in the past. He had to come if he wanted to rely on the sect, but he didn't want to have a grudge with Bright Nether Lake. It would be good if things could end peacefully. Still, he had his own motives. He asked for Ganjing to take advantage of them. Yen Xia paled when she heard this. Even enlightened Master Yuan was captured? Wang Ziyuan frowned, then smiled bitterly and sighed. My junior sister must have been careless. With her abilities, it wouldn't be hard for her to escape even if she had a treasure. Yen Xiaoyang clenched his fists and panted. He was about to stand up and speak when he felt a weight on his shoulder. He turned and saw Guiziliang holding him down and shaking his head. Wang Kaiwei thought for a while and stood up. Everyone, please sit. I will go out and have a word with this person. Jiang Zheng stood up and said solemnly, Third senior sister. Wang Kaiwei smiled. It's fine. I won't go far, just in front of the door. With that, a cloud rose under her feet, and she left the hall, quickly arriving outside the mountain gate. She was dressed in white and she stood there. Her sleeves fluttered, and she was as elegant as a lotus. Strong winds blew around her, and black and white chi swayed behind her. Taoist Yin's heart tightened when he saw her. Right now, the one in charge of the clear nether heavenly lake was Wang Kaiwei, and behind her stood a disciple of the clear nether school. She was definitely not someone he could face, so he unconsciously took a few steps back. Wang Kaiwei cast her gaze towards the two of them and said with a clear voice, Fellow Taoists, if you want fellow Taoist Yen to come out and apologize, then spiritual master who should first clearly explain why he forcefully seized a fellow Taoist's mount for no reason. Taoist Yin composed himself and argued, according to what I've heard. It was obviously Yen Xiaoyang who was being unreasonable. Why did he say that spiritual master who wasn't? Wang Kaiwei didn't argue with him. She focused her gaze on him and said, Since we both insist on our own words, then we can only decide this through strength. I will fight with the two of you, and if I lose, my clear nether lake will no longer interfere in this matter. If you win, please stay here as guests for the time being. Taoist Yin didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to say a few words. He was about to make a move. Although this was his original intention, he was a little worried. If he could really capture this person, how should he deal with him? Wang Kaiwei communicated telepathically. If I faint, you will take my place and use your blade to carry me away. A cold voice came from the depths of his heart. Understood. Her cultivation technique and the murderous shadow blade came from the same source, and she had a true spirit. Even if she failed and couldn't control her magic power, at a crucial moment, she could take her place. Taoist Yin and Mao Li discussed for a while. Even if they couldn't win, they wouldn't lose to the other party, so they agreed. All right, let's do as Spiritual Master Wang says. Wang Kaiwei nodded. Her magic power circulated, and she leaped into the sky. Then she raised 2 fingers and pointed downwards. In an instant 2 saber lights, one black and one white, that were about 3 meters long, came slashing down. The 2 of them hurriedly dodged. The saber chi wasn't fast, and it flashed past them before vanishing into the atmosphere. However, before they could counterattack, a white light suddenly flashed beside Taoist Mao and slashed his shoulder, causing him to stagger. He said in shock, "It's the origin leaving yin-yang flying knife of Chongyue True Temple. Fellow Taoist mustn't underestimate it." As soon as he said that, the white saber slashed at him again. Although it couldn't cut through his protective Taoist robe, he fell forward again, almost losing his balance. At this moment, Taoist Yin was entangled with the black saber that appeared and disappeared mysteriously, so he had no time to speak. He only responded vaguely, indicating that he understood. Wang Kaiwei looked at Taoist Mao and said, "This person is just as junior brother Shen said. He's just a greenhorn, but his treasured robe is tough, and he has that strange pearl. If Spiritual Master Yuan is careless, he'll easily fail." She knew that this person could also accept treasures from others, so she didn't even use her magic tool. She just stood at a distance and slashed the saber lights. In just a short while, Taoist Yin was drenched in sweat, but he finally found a chance to take out his protective treasure and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, what are you waiting for if you don't use the pearl?" Taoist Mao was also troubled. The octagonal hanging pearl could only reach a distance of 300 meters at most, and Wang Kaiwei was at least 600 meters away from them. How could she hurt her opponent? However, although he didn't have much wisdom in fights of magical powers, he wouldn't tell Taoist Yin the truth. He only replied vaguely, "Now's not the time." He tried to escape and look for an opportunity, but every time he flew into the light, he was ruthlessly slashed by a plain white saber light. Although it couldn't cut through his treasured robe, his momentum was dissipated, and he fell out of the light, unable to close the distance between them. Wang Kaiwei thought, this person isn't using the pearl, and he's trying to charge at me again and again. It's probably because the power of his treasured weapon can't reach me now. If that's the case, I'll just attack from a distance. Although she thought so, she didn't let her guard down. Although the 2 of them were beaten to a sorry state, they didn't show any signs of retreating. Obviously, they still had tricks up their sleeves. After Taoist Mao tried a few more times, he knew that it was difficult to get close to his opponent with his own strength, so he gave up on the idea. After enduring another slash from the saber light, he took out the 10,000 arrow flag gate from his sleeve and threw it into the sky, hoping to trap Wang Kaiwei just like he had just now. Because of the previous example, Wang Kaiwei was always on guard against her opponent's movements. When she saw the flag gate fly out and instantly split into 10, she didn't need to think too much to know that this was a magic weapon that used the way of changing numbers to win. Her reaction was also fast. With a thought, hundreds of Liuan yin-yang flying daggers condensed above her head, and with a turn of the daggers, they whizzed over. Although it only took a moment, the flag gate had already changed into more than 1,000, but in the next moment, they were all chopped into pieces by the flying saber light. However, the flag gate was still constantly changing into more than 1,000 shadows, but the speed of their changes was far slower than the speed of the saber light. The number of shadows became fewer and fewer, and in a flash, there was only one flag gate left. In the end, the black and white energies collided and destroyed the flag gate, turning it into two flagpoles that floated to the ground. From the beginning to the end, not a single arrow was shot. Taoist Mao did not know what to do. This was his most powerful technique. They were the two treasures he brought from the mountain gate. One was the 8 treasures suspending sun pearl, and the other was the 100 tattered robe that he was wearing. Not mentioning the former, the latter could only be broken by a true artifact and could only be broken by 100 consecutive attacks. On the other hand, Bao Zhu was unable to injure the enemy. If they continued to fight, they would undoubtedly lose. Thus, he anxiously called out, "Fellow Taoist Mao, can you think of a way to restrain this person so that I can?" Before Jean could finish speaking, he was slashed in the back again. He immediately swallowed the words he was about to say. In reality, no matter how powerful a magic treasure was, it still had to be used in conjunction with one's own methods. Just using it alone wouldn't pose much of a threat to someone who had experienced many battles. Wang Kaiwei did not even need to use the slaughtering gloomy blade to beat him to the point where he was unable to retaliate. From the beginning to the end, he didn't have the chance to use the 8 treasures suspending sun pearl. If it wasn't for the toughness of his treasured clothes, he wouldn't have been able to use it. He would have been killed on the spot. Yin Dao cursed in his heart and barely dodged the blade light that was entangling him. He took out a stone eagle the size of a palm and smashed it into pieces. There was the sound of an eagle's cry, and at the same time, a ray of blood light flew out. The blood light circled around his body, and 2 huge wings appeared on his back. When the blade light landed on his body, it was immediately bounced off. This item was given to him by the Southern Flower sect, and it was refined from a great demon at the peak of the 4th transformation. He was able to borrow the magic power of this eagle demon when it was alive for an hour. Since this demon had the body of an eagle, its flying speed was incomparably fast, and it was perfect to use to break through the current predicament. He originally planned to use this item only when his life was at stake, but he was the one who invited Taoist Mao down the mountain. If he were to fall here, Heaven Mending Pavilion would definitely not let him go, so he had no choice but to take it out. He shouted and flapped the wings on his back, stirring up a gust of wind. He soared into the sky and charged towards where Wang Kaiwei was standing. The saber lights in the sky slashed down, but they were all blocked by a layer of bloody light. Wang Kaiwei looked around and did not move half a step. She lightly waved her sleeves, and in a split second, a thin layer of colorful fog appeared between the two of them. This was a small divine ability commonly used by female cultivators in Qinsong school. It was called the dust fog curtain. As long as it covered a person, it could confuse their senses and make them lost inside, and they would not be able to come out for a while. After all, Taoist Yin had never used this kind of magic power before. His speed was too fast, and he could not dodge it in time. At first, he was a bit flustered and was afraid that there was something strange in the fog, so he was extremely cautious. However, after a while, he realized that only his eyes were covered, and nothing else was hindering him. As a result, he became more courageous and continued to rush forward. However, after flying for a while, he still could not escape the range of the fog. After a while, he completely lost his sense of direction and could only rush around randomly. He had no way to use his enormous strength. After separating this person, Wang Kaiwei focused all of her attention on Taoist Mao. With a wave of her delicate hand, dozens of flying knives surrounded him to prevent him from escaping. She was afraid that she could not cut open the treasured clothes, so she also sent dozens of blade lights to attack him together. Taoist Mao was shocked and said, slow down, I'm willing to admit defeat." Wang Kaiwei ignored him and continued to slash down with her blade. However, in the blink of an eye, the light on the treasured robe suddenly dissipated. Just as she was about to chop off the opponent's head, a strand of mana barged into the formation and slightly diverted the blade's momentum. She was slightly shocked and turned to look. She saw a handsome cultivator standing in the sky with an ink-black dragon under his feet. He smiled and cupped his hands at her, saying, "Senior apprentice sister, this person is still useful. Let him live for now." Wang Kaiwei said happily, so it's 6th junior apprentice brother. Let him live for now. She threw out a paper talisman and pressed it on Taoist Mao's fontanelle. The latter was forced by the knife light and did not dare to move, so he could only let her do what she wanted. He felt a chill on his head and his magic power was sealed. A feeling of exhaustion spread throughout his body, and he could no longer ride the cloud and fell from the sky. Wei Zihong waved his hand and summoned a wave of magic power to support him. Wang Kaiwei made a hand seal and collected the colorful smoke. Taoist Yin's great demon magic power had already dissipated. He looked left and right and saw that Taoist Mao was captured. He knew that he lost, and his expression changed several times. He was thinking about whether or not he should use the three of them to threaten them. However, he saw that the two of them were expressionless. He didn't know why, but his heart palpitated and he did not dare to move. He sighed and cupped his hands, saying, "The two of us lost. We are willing to accept your punishment." Wang Kaiwei also threw out a talisman to suppress his magic power. She then brought the two of them back to the Blue Feather Pavilion. After returning to the main hall, Wei Zihong naturally greeted everyone first. Then he rescued Lu, Ding and Yuan. However, they were still unconscious. After asking Taoist Yin, he found out that they were afraid that they would be lucky enough to escape, so he fed them some medicinal water. At the latest, they would only wake up after 3 days. With the enemies temporarily gone, everyone was on guard all day, so they were exhausted. Now they could finally go back to rest. After leaving the main hall, Wang Kaiwei called out to Wei Zihong and said, "Junior, did you keep that Taoist Mao alive to prevent Heaven Mending Pavilion from interfering in this matter?" Wei Zihong shook his head with a smile and said, "That's not it. My Zhaoyu school is not afraid of Heaven Mending Pavilion. I want this person because I want to go to their school to exchange for some medicinal jade. I am not afraid of them interfering, and I hope that the more they come, the better." During his trip to the Fengling Ocean, he already faintly knew that the great calamity was about to begin, and that the various sects were about to start fighting. Although he didn't know the specifics of the sect's plan, his horizons were much higher. He believed that killing a few Yuanian cultivators here was useless, so he might as well use this opportunity to capture a few more people. If the other party wanted him to release them, then he would use medicinal jade and precious materials to exchange for them. Hu Sanquan flew with all his strength, and halfway through he met up with a cultivator surnamed Lin from Taihao School. After a night, he finally returned to the front of the Blue Feather Pavilion. However, at this time, he heard a piece of news that Taoist Yin had invited a Heaven Mending Pavilion cultivator to assist him in battle. At first, he seemed to be doing well and won several battles. However, later on he was defeated by Wang Kaiwei from Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake and was now imprisoned in the Blue Feather Pavilion. When Hu Sanquan heard this, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. He inwardly cursed at his own stupidity. Originally, Taoist Yin had captured 3 people, so he already had the upper hand in this matter. He could have waited for everyone else to arrive before dealing with them. However, he acted on his own, and instead caused Hu Sanquan's side to become passive. The cultivator surnamed Lin hesitated for a moment and said, "Spiritual Master Hu, it seems that Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake is determined to protect the Blue Feather Pavilion this time. Are we really going to cause trouble for them?" Hu Sanquan's expression changed slightly. He was afraid that the cultivator would really retreat, so he smiled and pretended to say, "Fellow Taoist, don't worry. Although the Blue Feather Pavilion is relying on Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake, its founder is a disciple of my South Flower sect. If we go back to our roots, it is still a lower sect of my South Flower sect. If we fight with them, it is an internal matter of the sect, and no matter what we say, we are in the right. Moreover, when I returned to the mountain, Senior Brother Feng gave me a treasure. If necessary, I can come down the mountain to help." As expected, after hearing this, the cultivator surnamed Lin's expression became much more relaxed. He said, "What treasure did fellow Taoist bring?" Hu Sanquan smiled and said, "I definitely recognize this item. It was also given to me by your sect in the past." He took out a branch and stabbed it into the ground. Without watering it, it slowly grew taller. In less than 10 breaths, It grew into a sturdy, towering tree. Chapter 1050. Within the Xuanze ocean realm, Zhang Yan sat in front of the altar. His mind was clear and his body was empty. Looking into the distance, the sky was clear and indistinct. It was empty and mysterious, as if there was nothing there. Between his eyebrows, 3 feet away, there was a sparkling sword ball hovering in the air. It could be said that it was filled with qi and vitality. Ever since the grotto heaven was formed, this sword ball had been infused with qi by him and nurtured day and night. At this moment, it had finally reached the point where it could become sentient and become real. Even though the vital energy within it hadn't been accumulated to its peak, its sharp energy had already flowed out like a torrent. Not only did it affect the entire truth purification hall, it even stretched out to pierce through the sea and move back and forth, causing the surroundings to be filled with sword qi. For a moment, the sound of the sword tearing through the air could be heard. Zhang Yan felt the sharpness of the sword and did not want to turn this place into a dead world. He shouted, "Where is the formation spirit? Protect all living beings in this world." Following his order, a lady appeared and bowed to him. "I will obey the hall master's orders." After she finished, she turned around and activated all the restrictions in the small world to protect it. Zhang Yan calmed down and cleared his mind of all distracting thoughts. After sensing for a long time, he suddenly felt that there was consciousness struggling in the sword ball. His eyebrows were also twitching nonstop, as if there was something waiting to break out of the sword. Before it could do anything, there were already countless rainbow-colored shadows that floated between heaven and earth. He calmly felt the earth-shattering aura that was about to tear the sky and earth apart. Each wave was stronger than the last. The entire small world shook non-stop as if it was about to explode. After an unknown period of time, the surroundings suddenly turned dark. It was as if the world was silent and everything was still. His consciousness became faintly discernible, as if it was not moving. It was quiet yet not. He was immersed in this state, as if he had entered silence. He did not know the passage of time, as if he could reach the end of the world and would never wake up. Finally, in this extreme silence, a bit of true spirit appeared. Once the yang moved, it was like a prairie fire. There was a rumble in his consciousness as if it was about to explode. His body suddenly became as light as a feather, like floating in the clouds. He slowly opened his eyes, and all he could see was the flowing sword star. Countless rays of light flowed like the Milky Way. He stretched out his hand and caught a sword light. Lowering his head to take a look, he saw that the sword was bright and clear. A layer of enlightenment suddenly rose in his heart. This Qinghong had already turned his consciousness into reality, and from then on became a true weapon. He smiled. He raised his hand and wiped the sword's light. Amidst the sound of the sword's cry, he recited, 100,000 entrances of the heart, one sword illuminates 1,000 autumns, one hand plucking the strings of the heaven and earth. Stir up the stars in the sky. The moment he said this, there was a loud explosion. Who knows how many sword lights suddenly gathered into one, like a whale swallowing the ocean. It gathered on his body. This true sword intent came from oneself, and one's consciousness came from the body. They originated from the same body, and there was no difference. The true spirit was oneself, and the self was the true spirit. With the sword in hand, only one's heart and one's self. He pointed with his fingers, and a bolt of purple qi hard thunder burst out. However, there was actually sword qi leaping within it, and a sword rainbow shot out. There was actually a sword within the thunder, and there was thunder within the sword. This was the Tao of sword transformation that he had chosen. It could make the divine art and the sword fuse together, and when the sword was raised, it could turn into thunder and lightning. It was just that this killing true weapon had just been formed, and he still had to slowly ponder over the changes within. With a thought, a spot of sword light flew out and arrived in the hall. A true spirit that looked exactly like him appeared, and it sat on the couch, saying, "Someone is looking for me outside." Jingyu walked in and said, "Spiritual Master Han said he has something to ask of Master." These days, Zhang Yan had been sitting in seclusion, and his heart and mind were one. He used all his strength to refine the Qinghong sword pill, so he didn't send any doppelgangers outside, and he didn't ask about what was happening outside. This disciple was always trembling in front of him, and had a fearful look on his face. Unless it was a summons from the sect, or if it was an important matter in the sect, he would rarely take the initiative to see him. Now that he saw him outside the hall, he knew that there must be something, so he said, "Summon him into the hall." When Han Zwicheng arrived at the outer hall, Zhang Yan's doppelganger was already sitting on the platform. He hurriedly kowtowed, "Disciple greets teacher." "Zhang Yan, disciple, rise. How is the situation in Azure Sky Hall?" Han Zwicheng lowered his head and said, "Everything is fine." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Coming to see teacher today? I guess there must be something?" Han Zwicheng prostrated on the ground and said, "Teacher, Bu Loft was attacked, and they sent a letter asking for disciple to go down and save them. Disciple's heart is burning with anxiety, so I came to see teacher. Can disciple return?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows slightly, and Jingyu immediately came forward. He whispered a few words and explained the situation clearly. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Go down the mountain. If you meet with something difficult, you can come and find teacher." He made a grabbing motion with his hand, and 5 rays of light flashed and reflected into a jade scroll on the table. He then waved his sleeve and said, "Take this. If you are in danger, it can help you." Han Zwicheng hurriedly took it, and after kowtowing 3 times, he retreated. Once out of the hall, he activated the talisman and leaped down from the floating heavenly palace. Then, he turned into a traveling light and passed through the great pool of Dragon Lake, hurriedly rushing towards the direction of Bu Loft. In front of Bu Loft's mountain gate, the cultivator with the surname Lin looked up at the towering giant tree, and said with some disbelief, Could this be a leaf branch from our sect's great coiling divine tree?" Hu Sanquan laughed and said, "Yes, it is this item. I heard that when your sect's second-generation leader came to Southhua as a guest, he gifted this item to my sect's seniors. So it was obtained from the hands of Nanhua spiritual master He, no wonder." The cultivator with the surname Lin was enlightened. Back then, when the second-generation leader went to Southhua, he used a piece of coiling divine tree's leaf as a bet, and purposely asked a Taoist question. At that time, many disciples of Southhua sect were stumped, and just when they thought that no one could answer it, a Taoist child stood out and used clever words to resolve the question, and finally won the item. And this Taoist child was the spiritual master He who later traveled the world and was once a guest of many sections. The cultivator with the surname Lin thought to himself, "I heard that the descendant of spiritual master He was that Tao Jin who broke out of the sect, and this spiritual master's legacy was all divided among the other sections. I think this leaf also fell into the hands of Tsang Ding Cave at that time." Hu Sanquan looked at the branch that was still growing, and he was not satisfied. Once this item entered the ground, it could take root in the earth's veins, and connect to the spiritual vigor of this area. If used for good, it could harmonize yin and yang, the 4 seasons, and turn a place into a blessed land. But if used for evil, it could drain the spiritual veins of the mountains and rivers, and turn the ground beneath it into a land of death. Now that it was planted here, if it absorbed the spiritual vigor without restraint, in a few days, it could destroy the cultivation foundation of Blue Feather Pavilion. He said proudly, "Fellow Taoist Lin, we'll just wait here for it to come out." The cultivator with the surname Lin was a disciple of Taihao. He naturally knew the power of this divine tree, and he said happily, "We'll listen to spiritual master Hu." Because when Hu Sanquan and Yen Xie arrived outside the mountain gate, Yen Xie and the others also received a disciple's report, and knew that they came with ill intentions, so they ordered people to invite everyone to the hall to discuss countermeasures. Just now, everyone sat down, but Wei Zihong suddenly said, "Sect Master Yen, why is there a sign of spiritual vigor leaking out of your mountain? Did something happen to one of the formation gates?" Yen Xie couldn't help but be startled, and she focused her senses for a moment. She also felt that something was wrong. She said to Yen Xiaoyang, "Little brother, go and see what's going on." Yan Xiaoyang had only left for the time it took to finish a cup of tea, and he had already returned, saying impatiently, "Big sister, something's wrong. My blue feather pavilion's earth vein spiritual vigor seems to be dispersing, and the mountain gate's great formation is also somewhat unstable." What? Yan Xia's shock was no small matter. This mountain gate spiritual vigor was the foundation of Blue Feather Pavilion. If it was dispersing, how could their orthodoxy continue? Wei Zihong said, since it's not an accident within the sect, it must be the work of an outsider. Yan Xiaoyang said doubtfully, destroying the earth vein spiritual vigor, but avoiding the formation, does that Hu Sanquan have such ability? At this moment, a disciple entered the hall and reported, "Sect Master. Spiritual Masters, that Hu Sanquan has planted a tree outside, and it has already grown to a height of 300 meters. It hasn't stopped, and is still growing upwards. I'm afraid that in less than an hour, it will be on the same level as the sect's Feather Mountain." Wei Zihong said, "Looks like it really is this person's doing. Erecting trees to gather spiritual vigor, this is very similar to Taihao School's method, but it is affecting the earth vein's spiritual vigor. This tree is definitely extraordinary, and I want to experience it." Guiziliang said from below, "Spiritual Master Wei's Dao skills are profound, and we can't act rashly. Why don't I go first?" Jiang Zheng also said, "Spiritual Master Gui's mind is meticulous, and you can do this. However, I have some experience in dealing with that Taihao. Why don't I go with you?" Guiziliang said happily, "Having Spiritual Master Jiang with me is exactly what I've been looking for." The two excused themselves, and when they arrived outside the door, they raised their heads and saw the towering tree. Looking at its growth, it wouldn't be long before it crossed the mountain and reached into the clouds. Guiziliang formed a spell, and closed his eyes to observe for a moment before saying, "It is indeed this tree that is attracting the earth vein's spiritual vigor. If we don't stop it, Blue Feather Pavilion will become a land of death in 2 days at most." Jiang Zheng said, "Since we're out, we can try and see if we can destroy this thing." Guiziliang nodded, "I'll stand guard for Spiritual Master." The two of them agreed and flew away. Not long after, they got close to the trunk of the tree. However, they felt that the top of the tree was dark, and the dense branches and leaves had blocked the sunlight. Jiang Zheng was cautious and didn't want to get too close. He used his mana, and a baleful light shone from his back. After it entered the sky, it turned into fire, and with a loud bang, the fire exploded, and instantly the branches and leaves were set ablaze. However, after a few breaths, the branches and leaves shook, and the parts that were burned were suddenly cut off. In a blink of an eye, new branches grew out. After a while, countless green branches and leaves spread out, and it looked even more prosperous than just now. Jiang Jing shook his head. With just his mana, it was difficult to move such a huge tree. He was just trying, and he didn't expect it to be more difficult to deal with than he imagined. He looked around, and saw two figures standing at the bottom of the tree. One of them was Hu Sanquan, and with a gust of wind, he flew towards that direction. Guiziliang followed behind him. When Cultivator Lin saw Jiang Zheng's face, his expression tensed up, and he took a step back. Hu Sanquan saw his expression and said calmly, "Fellow Taoist, victory is in my hands. There's no need to fight them head-on." Cultivator Lin hurriedly said, "Spiritual Master Hu is right." Hu Sanquan calmly made a hand seal, and from the top of the tree, long branches hung down, blocking the front. The original empty space was quickly filled up by intertwining vines. He was the one who planted the tree, so as long as he was here, he would be protected by the divine tree. The tree's defense was not much weaker than the formation in front of them. Taihao School only dared to challenge Qinsong School because they had the great divine tree of Pan to protect the formation, and because they were on good terms with Nanhua. Although it was only a branch and a leaf, it was enough to protect them. When Jiang Zheng saw the dense branches and leaves in front of him, he tried to use his mana to sweep them away, but the situation was the same as just now. He only destroyed some of them, and they grew back again. He was also decisive. Seeing that his attack was futile, he didn't bother and said, "Fellow Taoist Gua, we can't deal with this tree. We'll think of a countermeasure after we go back." Guiziliang nodded. Before leaving, he waved his hand, plucked a broken branch, and put it in his sleeve. Then he also retreated. Husanquan said loudly, "Spiritual masters, please go back and tell Sect Master Gao Yen that as long as Yen Xiaoyang apologizes verbally and pays tribute to Nanhua High Sect every year, I'll let bygones be bygones and won't harm her land spirit again." When the two returned to the Blue Feather Pavilion, Jiang Zheng truthfully described the situation of the huge tree, and Guiziliang took out the broken branch. Wei Zihong took it and examined it carefully. He said, "This branch and leaf are very similar to the great coiling tree recorded in the ancient books. It seems that the huge tree is related to this item." Guiziliang said, "Just now, I'm using my spiritual opportunity to test this tree. This tree is very full of vitality, and the longer it grows, the harder it is to cut it. Unless I can cut its roots in one go, if I can only injure it but not kill it, I'm afraid that it will only cause the spiritual opportunity to collapse." Yen Xie's face was covered with worry, but she couldn't think of a solution at the moment. She murmured, "Could it be that our Blue Feather Pavilion is doomed this time?" Yen Xiaoyang said angrily, "Sister, why do you say such disheartening words? I'll go and fight with them right now. Even if I die there, it's better than being humiliated by them." As he spoke, he was about to rush forward, but a figure flashed across. It was Wang Ziyuan who stopped him and said with a smile, "Elder Yen, why are you so impulsive? Perhaps the few spiritual masters have a solution." Yen Xiaoyang hesitated for a moment and looked back. Guiziliang said, "We have two people in our hands, can we?" Everyone present understood the meaning behind his words, and looked at Wang Kaiwei in unison. The latter thought for a moment, then shook her head and said, "Let's not talk about whether this will work. With Hu Sanquan's mana, I don't think he can suppress this big tree." Wei Zihong grunted and said, "Senior apprentice sister, you're right." He twisted his fingers and turned the branch into ashes, then with a flick of his sleeve, he walked out. Wang Kaiwei stood up and asked, "Junior apprentice brother, where are you going?" Wei Zihong did not even turn his head and said, "I'm going to cut this tree right now." He did not stop walking but turned into a black light and disappeared in a few flashes. When he was outside the door, he heard a dragon's roar and saw black smoke rolling towards him, turning into a black dragon below him. He stood on the dragon's head and walked forward with his hands behind his back. In a flash, he arrived under the tree and looked up. This giant tree's crown could cover the mountains, and it was almost at the same level as the clouds. Even if he cultivated the Yuanyin body, he would not be able to break through such a giant object. The divine eye on his forehead opened a slit, looked up and down for a moment, then closed again. He said in a low voice, "I need to cut this tree, please help me, spiritual master." There was a voice in his heart, "Eldest Lang, to cut this tree, you need to use all your strength. It's a pity that you don't have the refining method of essence and blood from the master, or else we would be even more compatible." Wei Zihong said, "It's okay, I've seen it with my mana, it's enough to break it in one breath." He opened his arms and a golden light filled the air. He was already holding the sun-embracing axe in his hand, took a slight breath, raised the axe high, and fiercely chopped forward. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1051. As soon as Wei Zihong came out, Hu Sanquan felt that something was wrong. The person in front of him didn't have any astral clouds above his head, so he was clearly a third-stage cultivator. Looking at his appearance, it was very likely that he was the rumored Yaoyin sect master. He hurriedly made a hand seal and cast a spell. Countless branches hung down and formed a dense green leaf barrier. When Wei Zihong raised the axe, he suddenly saw a mysterious dragon appear on top of it. It breathed clouds and was extremely ferocious. The mysterious dragon stared at him, causing his breathing to stagnate and his heart to palpitate. Under this pressure, he found it extremely difficult to circulate his Fa-Li. He quickly took out a few pills and swallowed them, then focused his mind to circulate his qi. However, before he could get rid of this pressure, the axe had already landed heavily. Then he saw a heaven-tearing golden light rush out, followed by an ear-splitting dragon roar. Hu Sanquan and Master Lin's eyes widened as they watched the golden light rush over, but there was nothing they could do. Then they saw it silently enter the trunk of the tree. The two of them waited for a moment, only to discover that other than the tree's crown shaking slightly and a few leaves falling, there wasn't much movement. It was as if just now, there was only a light breeze blowing past. The cultivator surnamed Lin let out a sigh of relief and said, "Good, good. So it was just a bluff." Hu Sanquan opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but at this moment, a crisp crack came from the trunk. It sounded like the sound of a rope snapping, but also like the sound of the bark cracking. Hu Sanquan's heart couldn't help but sink. In a flash, the crackling sounds increased and became more and more concentrated. In the end, it almost became a continuous sound and continued to spread from the bottom to the top of the tree. The speed at which it spread also became faster and faster. Countless broken branches and leaves began to float down from the sky and landed on the ground. Once they landed on the ground, they scattered into a pile of flying ash. Soon, a thick layer of ash accumulated on the ground. Hu Sanquan saw that something was wrong. He formed a seal but couldn't sense anything. His expression changed and he shouted, "Fellow Taoist, quickly leave." With that, he stepped on the ground and flew away. The cultivator surnamed Lin also sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly flew away. The two of them had not gone far when countless fine cracks appeared on the branches of the big tree. Traces of flickering golden light seeped out from within. Then these cracks were torn wider and wider. In the end, a loud rumbling sound could be heard. The entire giant tree exploded with a loud bang. Countless broken branches and leaves were first swept up into the sky, then scattered in all directions, falling down like raindrops. Hu Sanquan and cultivator Lin suddenly felt a burst of magic power from behind them. They were unable to stabilize their flight lights and were simultaneously sent flying. Then, they heavily fell to the ground, their internal organs shaken. For a moment, they were unable to get up. After a long while, the two of them finally regained their breath. When they looked at the big tree again, they were shocked to find that it had already collapsed. There was no longer that huge shadow on the flat ground, only countless broken leaves were floating in the air. How could they still dare to stay here? They forced themselves to circulate their mana. He thought of escaping with the astral winds. However, before they could do anything, they felt an enormous force envelop them, and it instantly trapped them on the spot, causing them to be unable to move even half a finger. Heaven and Earth seal? Hu Sanquan and cultivator Lin's expressions were incomparably unsightly. The cultivator surnamed Lin smiled bitterly and said, "Losing to a third-stage cultivator is not an injustice. It's just that just now, that slash was truly world-shaking. I wonder what kind of magic treasure it is?" Hu Sanquan looked up at the sky and sighed. It must be a real treasure, otherwise how could it have injured the divine tree? "Fellow Taoist Lin, I was rash this time and implicated you." The cultivator surnamed Lin shook his head. "At this point, what's the point of saying such things?" The sound of wind suddenly rang out in the sky. A shadow flew over. Among the countless flying leaves, Wei Zihong appeared in front of the two of them on an inky flood dragon. Just now, after that slash, he had used up most of his magic power. However, the remaining bit was enough to deal with these two people. He raised his hand and flicked his fingers. Two talismans flew out and landed on the top of the two people's heads, suppressing their magic power. The inky flood dragon roared and swept its tail, wrapping the two people into the inky clouds behind it. With another leap, it soared into the sky and returned to where it came from. Once the big wood was destroyed, the stolen spiritual opportunity could no longer be stolen. After wandering for a while, it returned to the mountains and rivers. The blue feather pavilion's array was also stabilized. When Wei Zihong once again entered the blue feather mountain, the disciples on both sides made way for him. Their eyes were filled with awe. Many blue feather elders were guessing in their hearts. Among the disciples under Sage Zhang, other than Sage Lu and Sage Tian, Sage Wei's combat power was the strongest. When he reached the hall, Wei Zihong threw Hu Sanquan and cultivator Lin to the ground. He cupped his hands towards the seats and said in a clear voice, "Third senior sister, fifth senior brother, fellow Taoists, I was fortunate to not disappoint you. Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "Well done, junior brother." Yen Xie pulled Yen Xiaoyang up and said sincerely, "Sage Wei, if it weren't for you, the foundation of our mountain would have been destroyed. There's no way to repay this great kindness. Please accept a bow from us siblings." Saying that, the two of them bowed deeply to him. Wei Zihong moved his body to the side and said, "It's nothing. Sect Master Yen, there's no need to do this. Junior brother Han is my junior brother. Since he's not here, as his senior brother, I should extend a helping hand." Yen Xie still thanked him endlessly. Yen Xiaoyang looked at Hu Sanchuan's sorry state and his eyes were full of delight. He took large strides forward and said condescendingly, "Sage Hu, do you still recognize me?" Hu Sanquan glanced at him and snorted. He said, "Yen Xiaoyang, you're just relying on someone else's power. You're still defeated by me. What's there to be proud of?" Cultivator Lin said in a low voice, "Priest Hu, I meet on the chopping block. It's better if you don't say a few words." Hu Sanquan sneered. "Am I wrong? Yen Xiaoyang, what ability could he possibly have?" Yen Xiaoyang snorted and said, "Shameless boasting. If I had attacked you that day, if it wasn't for that mount of yours, how could you have returned alive?" That day, he followed the two of them. His goal wasn't to injure them, but rather to kill the other party since they had seized his mount. That way, he could vent his anger. However, although he had achieved his goal, he had also suffered considerable damage. Even so, he reckoned that if they were to truly fight, he wouldn't necessarily lose to this person. Guiziliang said with a smile, "Elder Yen, no matter what, this person is already a prisoner. No matter what, this person is already a prisoner, so why bother arguing with him?" Yen Xie glared at her younger brother. Yen Xiaoyang originally wanted to say something, but he could only resentfully shut his mouth. Wang Kaiwei looked at Hu Sanquan and said, "Sage Hu, I am Wang Kaiwei of the Bright Serenity sect. You know very well what was right and wrong in today's matter. I will only say one thing. If you are willing to resolve this matter, return the iron-winged eagle you seized, apologize to Elder Yen, and make a vow not to pursue this matter any further. I can make the decision to let you go now. What do you think?" Hu Sanquan lowered his head and thought for a moment. He shook his head and said, "There is no need to say anything more. As a disciple of the Southflower sect, there is no way I will agree to this. Sage Wang, don't be happy too early. Until the very end, it will be difficult to determine the victor. This matter might have been a mere dispute in the beginning, but now, it had become a dispute between two sections. This was related to the sect's face. If he agreed, once news of this got out, the Southflower sect would actually lower its head to a lowly sect like Jade Feather Pavilion. Wouldn't that be a complete loss of prestige?" Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, "I understand Sage Hu's intentions. Then please wait here for a period of time, Sage Hu. We will discuss this matter after the elders of your sect arrive." Hu Sanquan closed his eyes and said no more. Yen Xie clapped her hands. Two Jade Feather Pavilion disciples came forward and escorted Hu Sanquan and the Taoist surnamed Lin out of the hall. She turned around and revealed a rare smile and said, "If not for the help of fellow Taoists, I'm afraid this matter will not be resolved." Wang Kaiwei shook her head and said, "Although we have captured this person, this matter is not over yet. The disciples of your sect have not let down their guard. I believe that the person who Sanquan invited will arrive in a few days, and your sect cannot stop building the spell altar outside." Yen Xie trembled. She had thought that the crisis was over after capturing Hu Sanquan, but it seemed that there was an even greater problem. She believed in Wang Kaiwei's judgment and said, "Sage is right. I will go and supervise the disciples now." At this moment, in the Southflower sect, Fang Xin was circulating his qi to burn his orifices in preparation to break into the core transformation realm at any time. He was Huang Yugong's favorite disciple, and all the techniques he practiced were of the highest quality. Even the external medicine for core transformation had been prepared long ago. He just needed to cultivate to a certain extent and he would be able to break into this realm. At this moment he suddenly heard the sound of spring water. He slowly stopped his technique and opened his eyes. "Who is outside?" Someone outside the door whispered, "Little Uncle Master, there is a letter delivered." Fang Xinan said, "Bring it in." A young cultivator walked into the cave and very respectfully presented a letter. After Fang Xinan received it, he waved his hand at the person. The person bowed and left. He was rather careless at first, but when he opened the letter, he was shocked. The letter said that Hu Sanquan invited fellow Taoists to besiege Biu Pavilion, but they failed. In the end, even he was captured. After the fellow Taoists who were on good terms with him heard about this, most of them dispersed and did not dare to care about this matter anymore. Fang Xinan could not help but feel a bit terrified and thought, "Not good, senior martial brother who has been captured. If Master finds out that this matter was caused by me, he will definitely not let me off easily. I need to think of a way to save senior martial brother Hu." He held the letter tightly and thought hard. In the end, he gritted his teeth and leaped outside. As soon as he stepped out of the cave, there was a cliff. At the edge of the cliff, there were more than 10 birds. All of them had huge bodies and bright fur. They looked divine and mighty, but at this moment, they were all firmly tied to the copper rings by the cloud sun golden lock. When they saw him coming out, they raised their necks and flapped their wings, calling out in joy. These were all spiritual birds that he raised. In the mountain gate, it was already not bad to have 1 or 2 cultivators at his level, but the number of birds he had was far more than his peers could compare. If it was any other day, he would definitely comfort them, but today he was not in the mood. He leaped onto the back of a long-tailed golden sparrow. There was a steward outside who untied the golden rings. He pulled on the reins, and the big sparrow chirped. It opened its wings and leaped out of the high cliff, turning into a golden shadow and flying into the distance. Along the way, there were cultivators riding on birds and cranes coming and going. Some of them saw how fast he was and wanted to teach him a lesson, but when they saw him again, they could only shut their mouths, shake their heads, and let him go. After a while, Fang Xinan arrived in front of a jade peak. There was a cave on the cliff. He pulled the golden sparrow and shouted, "Senior Martial Brother Feng, Senior Martial Brother Feng. Is Senior Martial Brother Feng here?" After shouting for more than 10 times, the cave's stone door opened. A thin Taoist holding a feather fan stood in front of the door and said unhappily, "What is Junior Martial Brother Feng doing here?" Fang Xinan cupped his hands and said sincerely, "I have something to discuss with Senior Martial Brother." Feng Chengchang glanced at him and moved to the side, saying, "Come in and talk." The two of them entered the inner room, and the stone door closed again. Feng Chengchang sat on the couch and said indifferently, "You have something to say." Fang Xinan said, "I came here to ask for Senior Martial Brother's help to save Senior Martial Brother Hu." Feng Chengchang was slightly surprised and said, "Why, he was captured?" With a change of thoughts, he thought of the divine wood branch that he gave out and snorted, "What an idiot! The people from Blue Feather Pavilion don't have such ability. It must be one of the enlightened master from Clear Nether Lake who did it. Is it enlightened Master Lu or enlightened Master Tian?" Fang Xinan said, "It's that Yaoyin sect master. Rumor has it that this person has also cultivated the Yuaning Dharma body." Wei Zihong? Feng Chengchang was stunned and kept silent for a moment before sighing. "In that case, just Clear Nether Lake alone has 3 third-stage realm cultivators. It's really impressive." Fang Xinan said, "So I can only ask Senior Martial Brother to save enlightened Master Hu." Feng Chengchang snorted and waved his sleeves. "This matter is your own fault. What has it got to do with me?" Fang Xinan raised his head and looked at him as he said, "It's fine if Senior Martial Brother doesn't know about this, but now that you know about it, if you don't save him, how will Master view Senior Martial Brother after he comes out of his closed-door cultivation?" Feng Chengchang frowned. His master Huang Yugong was a person who was protective of his own people, and if he knew that his fellow disciple was being held captive but he didn't save him, he would definitely be unhappy. But to go and fight with a third-stage realm cultivator, he was also very unwilling. This matter wasn't good to manage or not to interfere, so he started to regret letting Fang Xinan in. Fang Xinan said in a low voice, If Senior Marshal Brother is willing to save Senior Marshal Brother who, I'm willing to tell you something. Feng Chengchang took a deep look at Feng Xin but didn't say a word. Feng Xin continued to speak on his own. 2 months ago, when Master and Sage Yuan were playing chess, I accidentally heard that in another 200 to 300 years, Sage Xian's lifespan will come to an end and it seems that he will be reincarnated in advance. Feng Chengchang, who was originally expressionless, was shocked when he heard this. He said, "Really?" Feng Xin said seriously, "I dare not lie to you, Senior Marshal Brother." Feng Chengchang heaved a sigh of relief. He was already in the 3rd stage of Dharmakaya. Originally, he wanted to plan to break through the barrier and then plan to go up. Unfortunately, the fate of heaven was not there, and the spirit point was not stable. However, after going through the karmic trial, it was impossible for the sect to have another heavenly abode. He gave up everything to enjoy life and cultivated hard to get the cultivation he had today. But in the end, there was no way forward, so one could imagine his frustration. However, those who could cultivate to the 3rd stage of Yuaning were all people with strong willpower. Therefore, he still cultivated day in and day out and didn't slack off. But if a heavenly abode passed away, it would be different. When the time came, there would be an empty spot in the sect, and he could take over. Even if there was still the eldest disciple Huang Songquan, he might still have a chance. He said, "Junior Marshal Brother Feng, who else knows about this?" Feng Xin said, "Other than Senior Marshal Brother Feng, I haven't told anyone else." Feng Chengchang knew that he owed Feng Xin a favor this time. He thought for a while and finally agreed, "All right, I'll go down the mountain with you." Floating Astronomy. Chapter 1052. Since Feng Chengchang had made up his mind, he did not delay any further. He packed up and left the cave. When he was outside, he threw out a raft and called Feng Xin up. They rode the clouds and headed towards Biuxian. Feng Xin knew that he had a brown-tailed beast and did not see him take it out. He asked curiously, "Shixiang, why not ride it?" Feng Chengchang cast a sidelong glance at him and said, "Spiritual birds and rare beasts can fight for victory in battle. They are companions in life and death. We should regard them as friends. To drive them under our feet, how can a gentleman do that? I advise Junior Brother to cherish your own spiritual seed. You can order it around as you please. It's not the right way to do that." Feng Xin agreed on the surface, but he thought otherwise. Beasts will be beasts after all. So what if I use it as a form of transportation? Which sect member doesn't do the same? To even treat them as friends, what a joke. Feng Chengchang saw his expression and could easily guess what he was thinking. He thought, "Do you think I am an old-fashioned person? These spiritual birds and precious beasts have been trained by me, Nanhua, and they are also loyal and faithful. If you can win their hearts, they will sacrifice themselves for you in battle, and will never change until death. If you did not help me this time, where would I find the time to guide you? I have said what I have to say. As for whether you can understand it, it has nothing to do with me." After the two of them traveled for half a day, the mountain gate of the Biu Pavilion was already in sight. There were 2 large mountains, Mount Bai and Mount Yu. Looking down from above, the mountains were gentle and seemed to merge into one. It was like a sleeping spiritual bird with its wings folded and its head bent. Feng Chengchang sneered. Back then, the owner of Biuxian, Yan Wenjing, was an outstanding person. It was a pity that his master passed away early and he had no hope of entering the imperial palace. That was why he came out to open a mountain gate. He was originally from the same sect as Nanhua and could have talked things over nicely. Who would have thought that he would join Qinsong? It can be seen how useless the people in the sect are. Feng Xin rolled his eyes and pretended to sigh. Isn't that right? It's eldest senior brother's fault for not teaching him well. Having been by Huang Yugong's side for a long time, he knew quite a bit about the big and small matters of the sect. The person who took care of the mundane affairs of the Southern Flower sect was usually the eldest disciple of the sect, but Huang Songquan had always been focused on cultivation. Therefore, such matters were handed over to a few in-name disciples who had no hope of cultivating. However, since these people didn't have any desire to improve themselves, they only sought comfort and pleasure. One of them even went as far as to offer female cultivators to him. Although this kind of absurd thing was quickly stopped by the elders in the sect, it was inevitable that some of the lower sects would be disloyal to Nanhua. Back then, Bai Yuxian had also been pressured, and from then on, they had the thought of looking for another backing. Feng Chengchang slowly lowered the boat. Because he saw that there were many altars and restrictions erected below, he didn't go any closer. From afar he said, "Nanhua sect. Feng Chengchang has come to visit. May I ask Sage Wei to come out and meet me?" His voice was so loud that no one in Bai Yuxian couldn't hear him. Yen Xie and the others knew that someone had come, so they gathered in the hall. Wei Zihong glanced outside and asked, "Sect Master Yen, do you know where that Feng Chengchang came from?" Yen Xie replied, "Feng Chengchang is a disciple of Tsangding Heaven, but the one who taught him Dao arts was someone else. This person is on good terms with the Yellow Sage. That's why he specially transferred Feng Chengchang to the Yellow Sage. He can be considered a great cultivator who has cultivated an avatar, but he rarely comes out. That's why his reputation isn't known in the world." Wang Kaiwei said, "To be able to cultivate to the third stage, he definitely isn't someone easy to deal with." Wei Zihong smiled. "Since he called for me, I'll go meet him and see what he has to say." Wang Kaiwei said, "Wait a moment, junior brother." Wei Zihong stopped and said, "Senior sister, do you have any instructions?" Wang Kaiwei said, "This person's hostility isn't obvious. It's very likely that he's here to negotiate. Junior brother should know what to do." Wei Zihong muttered to himself for a moment, then looked at Yen Xie and said, "Sect Master Yen, do you trust me?" Yen Xie said, "It's all up to Sage Wei." Wei Zihong nodded and waved his sleeves. He walked outside. Just now, Feng Chengchang's voice could be heard by Hu Sanquan and the others who were imprisoned in the back mountain. The cultivator surnamed Lin said happily, "Sage Feng is here. He should be able to rescue me." However, when he tilted his head and saw that Hu Sanquan didn't look happy, he couldn't help but ask curiously, "Brother Hu, do you think that Sage Feng isn't that Yaoyin sect master's match?" "That makes sense. Sage Wei wields a true artifact. Sage Feng probably has no chance of victory. Sai, what should we do?" Hu Sanquan thought to himself, it would be best if senior brother Feng was captured and brought here. At this moment, not only did he not want Feng Chengchang to rescue him, he even hoped that Feng Chengchang would lose. This matter had arisen because of him, and now that he was also captured, even if he was rescued by his fellow disciples, he wouldn't be able to raise his head in the sect and might not be able to escape punishment. However, if Feng Chengchang was captured, then the spearhead wouldn't be pointed at him. Feng Chengchang didn't wait long outside before he saw a handsome cultivator riding a flood dragon towards his home. When he came close, he took the initiative to cup his head and said, "Are you Sage Wei?" Wei Zihong returned his greeting and said, "I am indeed Wei. Sage Feng, did you invite me out for some advice?" Feng Chengchang said, "I invited you here specifically to resolve the matter between our two sections. If you have any requests, there is no harm in speaking." Wei Zihong looked at his expression and saw that he indeed had the intention of reconciling, so he repeated Wang Caiwei's conditions from yesterday. It was nothing more than compensation, an apology, and an oath. When Feng Chengchang heard this, he thought for a moment and shook his head. Since they wanted to reconcile, then an apology was necessary. He had already made preparations before he proposed this, but from his point of view, it couldn't be done openly and could only be done privately. As for an apology and an oath, that was even more out of the question. This was clearly telling the people of the world that Nanhua's side had lost this battle. If word got out, it would tarnish his own reputation. He was still thinking about how to enter the grotto heaven, and with this stain on his reputation, the sect wouldn't give him any chance. So he said slowly, "It's just a misunderstanding, not a battle of life and death. Why do you have to be so harsh? Why don't you release Hu Sanquan and give everyone some gifts in his name? You and I can treat it as a misunderstanding and end this peacefully. Isn't that better?" Using Hu Sanquan's name as an apology wouldn't damage the sect's reputation at all. The other side would also receive substantial benefits, and the important thing was that they wouldn't fight to the death. This was the best of both worlds. When Wei Zihong saw that Wei Zihong had avoided apologizing and swearing, he knew what Wei Zihong's intentions were. Wei Zihong simply wanted to rescue Hu Sanquan first. As for what would happen in the future, Wei Zihong believed that Wei Zihong would not care too much. After today, the battle between the two parties would probably continue. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to be polite. He chuckled and said, "I wonder what you can offer?" Feng Chengchang was slightly excited. He said, "My sect has many spirit birds and rare beasts, and among them are high-grade. They won't be at a disadvantage against you and me. I can make the decision to gift you 2 of them. What does fellow Taoist think?" Wei Zihong said solemnly, "After this incident, even though no one from my clear nether heavenly lake was harmed, more than a dozen disciples from Jade Feather Pavilion died. Does fellow Taoist think that the lives of these dozen people are not worth it? Is it worth 2 beasts?" Feng Chengchang frowned. He really didn't care about the lives of these juniors in his heart. He thought that Wei Zihong had brought up this matter just to ask for some benefits. But as long as they could come to an agreement, he could make some concessions. So he said, "Then what else does Taoist Master want?" Wei Zihong said indifferently, "As long as you give me pill jade to exchange for it." Feng Chengcheng glanced at him and said unhappily, "Is Taoist Master Wei intentionally making fun of me?" Even though he also wanted pill jade. That was provided by the sect for his cultivation, and the amount was extremely small. He still felt that it wasn't enough and used it to exchange for Hu Sanquan. This was absolutely impossible. Wei Zihong looked back and said solemnly, "I am not joking. If you want to redeem Hu Sanquan and the others, you need to give pill jade in exchange." Feng Chengchang stared at him and said, "Is there anything else to discuss?" Wei Zihong slowly shook his head. Feng Chengchang sucked in a breath. Then he snorted lightly and said, "If that's the case, then you and I can only fight to decide who wins and who loses." At this moment, in another place in the East Flower Continent, the red-clothed woman who had been with Hu Sanquan and the others that day had already invited a Yu Xiao disciple she was on good terms with in the past. She was hurrying towards the agreed place. Just as she was halfway there, a letter suddenly flew over in front of her. She raised her hand and received it, but after reading it, her expression changed and she exclaimed, "How could this be?" Taoist Zhou looked over in surprise and asked, "Fellow Taoist Yang, what happened?" The red-clothed woman sighed and said apologetically, "Fellow Taoist Zhou, this letter says that fellow Taoist Hu Sanquan slipped up and was captured yesterday. It seems that fellow Taoist will have to return empty-handed this time." As she said that, she handed the letter over. Taoist Zhou took it and read it, and instantly felt disappointed. The person in question wasn't here, so what use was there for him to go? Moreover, the other side had a great Yuanian cultivator in the 3rd stage, and it was Wei Zihong, who was rumored to have killed Zhou Zishang. How could he fight against him? His mind changed, and just as he was about to say a few polite words and leave, another letter flew over, and this time, it was coming towards him. He couldn't help but be startled, and with a tap of his hand, the letter landed in front of him. His gaze swept through it, and after reading it, his expression changed. He laughed and said, "Since I'm here, how can I give up halfway?" The red-clothed woman looked at him in disbelief and said, "That spiritual master Wei cultivated the Yuanian Dharma body. Fellow Taoist you," Taoist Zhou said, "I still have some self-awareness. I'm not here to fight with that spiritual master Wei, but to go somewhere else." He waved the letter in his hand. An informant reported to me that Han Zwicheng from Zhaoyu faction is heading towards Jade Feather Pavilion. We don't need to go there, and can set up an ambush along the way and capture this person. He thought in his heart, "My Zhou clan has always been at odds with Zhaoyu faction, and we've suffered many losses previously. If we can take this chance to capture Han Zwicheng, then Hall Master Xen Ming will definitely be happy." The red-clothed woman was shocked. Going against Jade Feather Pavilion was one thing, but going against Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake was another. If she took the initiative to intercept Han Zwicheng, she would probably anger his master, Spiritual Master Zhang. Yu Xiao school might not be afraid, but she was just from a small clan, so how would she dare to meddle in this matter? Thinking of this, she secretly complained in her heart. If she knew this would happen, she wouldn't have asked this person to come. She coughed and avoided his gaze. It's just that fellow Taoist who isn't here, so it's useless to think about it. I still have something to do, so I won't be going with you. As she said that, she turned around and was about to leave. However, she hadn't gone far when she heard a teasing voice from behind. Where are you going, fellow Taoist? She turned around and saw Zhou Huanyan raise his hand. Instantly, dozens of balls of starlight fell toward her, and for a moment, her eyes were filled with golden shards. He thought that the other party was going to attack him, so he couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He hurriedly turned around and waved his sleeves to shoot out a rainbow ribbon, which twirled around and protected his body. However, when the starlight fell, it wrapped around her along with the ribbon. It became brighter and heavier, and not long after, she felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on her. It was extremely strenuous, and she was sweating profusely. Her chest felt so tight that she wanted to vomit. Zhou Huanyan smiled faintly. It seemed that what he cultivated was one of the 4 qi and 2 techniques of Yu Xiao school, the scripture of star observation. After cultivating this technique, the starlight that was emitted could be light or small as one wished. When the technique was raised, it could fill a mountain, and when the technique was concealed, it could turn into a speck of dust. Once a cultivator came into contact with it, it would be extremely difficult to get rid of it. However, from the outside, it looked no different from ordinary Yu Xiao Xian technique. If it wasn't someone who knew the ins and outs, they wouldn't be able to tell. The woman in red felt the pressure on her body getting heavier and heavier. Soon, she couldn't hold on anymore and struggled. Zhou Huanyan, what are you doing? Zhou Huanyan sighed. I'm just alone and I'm not familiar with the route, so I need to ask fellow Taoist to travel with me. Why is fellow Taoist in such a hurry to leave? The woman in red forced a smile and said, I see. It's just that my escape technique isn't as good as fellow Taoists. I'm afraid that by the time we get there, I won't be able to make it in time. Zhou Huanyan nodded and said, that makes sense. But it's fine. I have the small raft of bewitchment with me, so I can bring fellow Taoist along. As he said that, he waved his sleeves and took out a cloud raft that could stand 3 to 4 people. He stretched out his hand and gestured in the air, saying, please. The woman in red felt her body lighten, but when she saw that the surrounding starlight was still there, she had no choice but to step on it. Zhou Huanyan stood on it after her. With a thought, the starlight under his feet went straight up, piercing through the clouds and flying north. After Han Zhucheng left the mountain, he rushed above the high clouds, riding on the strong wind to rush forward. When he was about to reach the boundary, he suddenly saw a spot of starlight flying over from the distant sky. He didn't look at it and only cared about his own journey. But when the starlight came over, it blocked in front of him and stopped him from moving forward. He had no choice but to slow down and said angrily, which fellow Taoist is it? Why are you joking with me? When the light dispersed, Zhou Huanyan and the woman in red appeared. The former bowed and said, fellow Taoist Han, I'm afraid you won't be able to go to the Blue Feather Pavilion. Zhou Huanyan smiled and said, what do you mean? Then, his expression changed and he asked cautiously, you're a disciple of Yu Xiao? Zhou Huanyan smiled and said, my cave abode has a unique scenery. Fellow Taoist Han, please come back with me and stay for a few days. As he spoke, he cast up to 100 rays of Dawei starlight and they came whistling down. He wanted to end the battle quickly and suppress Han Zhucheng. Han Zhucheng didn't have much experience in battles and he knew of Yu Xiao's reputation. He knew that he wasn't a match for him. In a moment of anxiety, he took out the jade booklet that Zhang Yan gave him and opened it. A torrential light of water burst out from within and when it reached the sky, it turned into a huge wave and rushed up. Zhou Huanyan felt the vast mana within and his expression changed. He shouted and pressed down with all his mana. However, when it collided with the huge wave, it was like a mayfly trying to shake a tree or a mantis trying to stop a chariot. The starlight that was sent out was instantly dispersed and there was only a rumbling sound in his ears. He suddenly felt the world was spinning and he fell head first into the wave. Then, the light of water flashed and returned to the jade booklet. The item rolled and closed in the air and fell down. Hans Wiching stretched out his hand and caught it. He looked at the woman in red again and saw that she was in a daze and didn't seem to have any intention to make a move. He didn't bother about her and urged his mana to go to the surface. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1053. Outside the Bai Yun Pavilion, Wei Zihong knew that there was no way to negotiate. He bowed to Feng Chengchang and was about to retreat. However, Feng Chengchang stopped him and said, "Perfected one, please wait." Wei Zihong looked sideways and said, "Perfected Feng, is there anything else?" Feng Chengchang said, "How about I make a gentleman's agreement with Perfected Wei?" Wei Zihong said, "Perfected one, please speak." Feng Chengchang pondered for a moment, then looked at him and said, "If I lose this battle, I will naturally be at your disposal. If I am lucky enough to win against Perfected Wei, please release my junior brother Hu. Is that okay?" He understood that even if he defeated Wei Zihong, he might not be able to capture him, let alone break the Baiyu Mountain Gate. In the end, he would not be able to achieve his goal, so he had to say this first. Wei Zihong nodded readily and said, "Let's do it this way." After receiving his answer, Feng Chengchang bowed with a Dao salute and retreated. He only stopped a few kilometers away. Looking at the other side, he could not help but think of a countermeasure. As a Yuanying third-stage cultivator of the Nanhua sect, he could travel with 18 kinds of strange beasts. However, the more strange beasts he carried, the more magical power he would consume. Moreover, he had to appease and get close to each kind of strange beast in order to cooperate with his sect. In his opinion, it was not bad to have 3 to 5 of them. There was no need to have more, and it would not be able to unleash the full power of the strange beasts. If he thought that the methods were lacking, he could use the Soul Essence Talisman instead. He had repeatedly reminded his juniors not to be greedy and only to seek refinement. However, few people could listen and had always been blindly pursuing quantity. On the battle formation, he had to have a target. He had to use different strange beasts to deal with different opponents. He knew that Wei Zihong had a treasure, but no matter what method he used, as long as he knew in advance. It was not that there was no way to deal with it. When he achieved the Dharmakaya, he had once refined a pair of yin-yang double snakes, which was one of the few in the world. From then on, it was as if he had 2 lives. Now, the body of the snake was inside while the other was outside. Even if this Dharma body was destroyed, it could still be reborn in another place. Unfortunately, after using this method, he would no longer be able to control snakes and pythons in the future. But compared to the chance of achieving the grotto heaven in the future, it was worth it. Wei Zihong's expression was solemn. In the Donghua continent, those who could cultivate to the 3rd stage of Yuanying were not easy to deal with. The other party already knew that he had a true treasure. Yet, he still dared to come forward and ask for a duel, so he must have something to rely on. Perhaps he had a true treasure on him, or perhaps he had a backup plan to deal with him. He absolutely could not be careless and had to be careful. He suppressed the thought of taking out the sun-embracing axe and decided to test the waters first, just like how he would in a fight between peers. But he had not. A Feng Chengchang had already cast a spell, and a huge toad leaped out from behind him. Feng Chengfeng's Wu. And A to B. Yang He Wu. Wei Zihong sensed that there was a fishy smell in the sand and suspected that there was a strange poison in it. He pulled on the reins and the inky flood dragon beneath him roared, raised its head, and arched its back. He flew above the clouds and easily shook off the yellow sand. Feng Chengchang did not chase after them. Instead, he commanded the toad to bite left and right. Soon, within a radius of 100 li, very quickly, within 100 miles, it was filled with such filth. Wei Zihong couldn't see what the goal was. He thought that as long as he escaped far away, wouldn't all his plans be for naught? Unexpectedly, there was a puffing sound from the yellow sand. Small toads with sharp heads and thin tails and thin wings jumped out. With a push of their legs, they all jumped into the sky. Wei Zihong looked and said, "So, it's a toad." This thing could absorb the essence of cultivators. Although it wasn't much to him, if there were too many of them, it would be troublesome. Stepping lightly, the black flood dragon spat out a cloud of black smoke. The toads didn't care and charged into it. In a short while, countless insect corpses with burnt wings fell from the sky. Seeing that more than half of them hadn't been killed, he took out a flute from his sleeves and placed it by his mouth. With a light blow, it gave off a melodious tune. All of the flying bugs fell down like they were drunk. Feng Chengchang thought to himself, "I've heard that this Yao insect leader is the master of the sect's most important weapon. Who knows how many magical weapons she has on her?" Back when we were breaking the formation of the Devil's Cave, the people of the Devil's sect were beaten to the point that they were unable to fight back. I have to be careful. I can't be too greedy. It won't be too late to use my killing moves after I slowly use my methods. He made a hand sign and numerous toads flew out from the yellow sand. They came one after the other, looking endless. Wei Zihong frowned. If he didn't bother, then in a short while, the toads would swarm over. Although they might not be able to hurt him, they would be annoying. Thus, he had no choice but to destroy the source. However, this action put him in a disadvantageous position. This person wasn't famous. Who would have thought that he would gain the upper hand in just one move? He shook his sleeves and threw out tens of bolts of lightning, wanting to break the yellow sand. Feng Chengchang wouldn't let him have it so easy. He waved his hand and threw out tens of bolts of lightning. The two collided and were dissolved in midair. However, at this moment, he felt the sky darken and then a strong wind pressed down. He raised his head and saw that the black flood dragon had taken advantage of the moment he attacked to attack. This thing was over 100 feet long, its body was covered in wet scales and it didn't look easy to deal with. He was a Nanhua sect cultivator and could tell with one look that this flood dragon wasn't inferior to the spiritual beasts he brought. His eyes sharpened as he thought about whether or not he should try to kill it and cut off one of its arms. However, after thinking about it, he decided to dodge. His body shook slightly and he turned into smoke and flew away. After cultivating the technique, even if a cultivator didn't purposely cultivate the technique, he would still be able to fly extremely fast. The black flood dragon was intelligent. After following for a while, it realized that it couldn't catch up and was afraid that it would be tricked, so it turned back. At this moment, Wei Zihong had already used the astral wind to clean up the yellow sand toad. However, the person he was facing wasn't simple. He was stronger than all the opponents he had seen in the past. Even if it was just a test, he couldn't give his opponent a chance to attack. He took out a porcelain bottle from his sleeves and removed the stopper. He tossed it into the air. The bottle shook slightly and a wisp of yellow smoke came out. When it reached the top of the sky, it immediately formed a giant hand. With a flip of its palm, it slammed down with endless pressure. This item was given to him by the Clear Feather Sect leader, Tao Zhenhong, when he was in the Fengling Ocean. The bottle contained the fifth earth essence qi. It only needed a spell to form the black-yellow hand. Feng Chengchang saw that the sky above was almost covered by the hand. He didn't want to waste his spiritual energy to block it. He opened his sleeves and floated away on a cloud. Wei Zihong reached out and pointed. The mouth of the bottle tilted, and the black-yellow hand immediately changed direction. It swept over again. After dodging a few times, Feng Chengchang felt that if he didn't fight, he could only fly away. However, it was useless. He was the one who came to fight. Even if Wei Zihong didn't move, he could only return obediently. In that case, the only choice left was to break the porcelain bottle. He flicked his sleeves and threw out the 10,000 beast collar. As the red light spat out, there was an eagle's cry. A golden hooked beak, large wings, and a brown tail leaped out. With a flap of its wings, it flew up and circled towards where Wei Zihong was. Then he made a hand seal and blew lightly. A strong wind was generated, spinning and whistling. Like a tornado, it collided with the black-yellow hand and instantly dispersed it. Wei Zihong glanced at the black-yellow hand and said to the black flood dragon, "Go deal with him. Be careful, don't let him finish you off." The black flood dragon hissed. It rushed towards the black-yellow hand. He stretched out his hand and pointed at the porcelain bottle, wanting to condense the black-yellow hand again. However, at this moment, the protective treasure light on his body suddenly shone brightly. With a snap, it actually shattered. Then he saw a green shadow charging over at an incomparably fast speed. He narrowed his eyes and didn't panic. He raised his finger and flicked. The green light wailed and flew far away. Only now did he see clearly that it was a green bird. However, it was only the size of a thumb. Such a small thing could actually break through his protective treasure light. If it rushed out while he was fighting with his opponent, it would be impossible to guard against. He used his Xian Qi and released the protective treasure light. When he was about to use the porcelain bottle again, he saw that the green bird chirped and actually pecked with its beak. The kingfisher chirped and actually pecked the bottle away. Then, it turned into a green shadow and returned to Feng Chengchang's side. It transformed into a cute and lovely girl in green. She rubbed her shoulder and pouted as she handed the porcelain bottle to the former. She said in a wrong tone, "Master, that person is so powerful. I was almost injured by his mana." Feng Chengchang picked up the bottle and shook it. He said from afar, "Fellow Wei, I'll temporarily accept this item." Wei Zihong smiled and said indifferently, "It's fine. I'll leave it with you first. I'll take it back myself later." Even if this item fell into the opponent's hands, it couldn't be used without the incantation. This time, he was able to force the opponent to release the green bird. Even if he lost this treasure, it was worth it. While the two were talking, there were roars coming from the side. A flood dragon and a black-yellow hand were fighting fiercely. However, the flood dragon seemed to be at a disadvantage. Wei Zihong only took a glance and didn't pay much attention to it. This flood dragon was brought out from the Duzhen Hall. It was strong and tough. Even if it wasn't the black-yellow hand's opponent, it was enough to resist for a long time. He shook his body and a mysterious cloud rose above his head. There was a pill inside. It was so dazzling that one couldn't look at it directly. Outside, there was a surging tide of smoke that spread for a few miles. Feng Chengchang looked at it carefully for a moment. He didn't recognize this profound pill-tide smoke. He thought, the Yaoying clan hasn't appeared in the 9 continents for a long time. There's no way to know his background. I can only deal with him carefully later. He wanted to test him a few more times. However, Wei Zihong didn't give him the chance. Behind him, the tide of smoke rose like a river crashing against the shore. Feng Chengchang seemed to want to test his magic power. This time, he didn't dodge. He took out the incantation. Immediately, the shadow of a black turtle appeared on his body. It raised its head and neck. Its body was 100 feet wide. It was as big as a hill. Its 4 legs were nailed to the ground. It was like a rock in the middle of a river. No matter how the tide of smoke brushed against it, it didn't move. However, this layer of attack was not over. The profound pill flashed and a golden light shone. Suddenly, there was a thunderclap. The shadow of the black turtle let out a silent wail. In just a moment, several golden lights struck it until it dimmed. Feng Chengchang was slightly surprised. This was the soul of a black turtle. It wasn't a real body. It was expected that it couldn't withstand the opponent's attack. However, he didn't expect it to collapse so quickly. It was obvious that the strength of the magic power was beyond his expectations. Feeling that he couldn't just sit and wait for death, he had to fight back. He opened his sleeve and released a 6-armed white ape. With a roar, it jumped up from the cloud. At the same time, it took out the incantation and used the heaven and earth seal technique. Wei Zihong's body stiffened. However, he didn't release the technique. Instead, he raised his hand in front of him and also used the heaven and earth seal technique. At the same time, the profound pill on top of his head rotated and shot out dozens of golden lights. Feng Chengchang's expression stiffened. He was also frozen. For a moment, although the two of them could still use their magic power, neither could leave far. Feng Chengchang's eyes flashed. With their magic power, they would no longer be able to restrain each other after 2 or 3 breaths. However, the most dangerous situation was also the easiest to create an opportunity. Perhaps he wouldn't even need to trick the opponent into taking out his treasure. He would have the opportunity to win the battle. After thinking for a while, he made a decision. With a low murmur, he didn't know what she said, but the blue-feathered woman behind him suddenly turned back into the body of a kingfisher and shot out like an arrow. Her target wasn't Wei Zihong, but the inky flood dragon. In the blink of an eye, she came close and ruthlessly pierced the flood dragon's neck. She actually pierced a deep bloody hole and drilled into it. The flood dragon let out a pained roar and rolled on the cloud. The big turtle broke away from its opponent, flapped its wings and rushed towards Wei Zihong. There was a flash in the sky. It was a soaring serpent that appeared and pounced down with a sharp hiss. At this time, the six-armed white ape also arrived. In an instant, the three strange beasts pounced at him at the same time. Feng Qingchang's gaze was fixed in front of him. He didn't care that the shadow of the black tortoise around him was almost broken. Although the three beasts each had their weaknesses, they each had their own magical powers. When they worked together, even if the opponent took out a treasure, it would be useless. As long as he could tear apart the layer of magic power on the opponent's body, this battle would be his victory. Wei Zihong looked on coldly. The two of them were originally testing each other, but they didn't expect the situation to change so quickly. In the blink of an eye, it was the moment of life and death. His figure stood ramrod straight, and he didn't even take out a single magic treasure. Only a shapeless gust of wind suddenly appeared beneath his feet. Looking from afar, a long void chi soared up behind him, and it merged with the clouds. It was indistinct, and it looked like a coiling dragon shadow. Then he raised his hand. With a rumble, the six-armed ape that leaped over first seemed to be hit by an invisible force and actually rolled out. This was the Myriad Origins transformation technique. Back then, Grandmaster Yao Yin Yizhiyang used a mysterious technique that could integrate external qi into one's mana. And with the help of Zhang Yan, he refined the dragon monarch's blood essence. Just now, this attack was equivalent to a blue dragon swinging its tail. How could the big ape withstand it? With just this attack, it was already bleeding from its 7 orifices and was heavily injured. Suddenly he felt his body sink. He looked up and saw that it was the claws of the giant venomous serpent. However, when it collided with the gust of wind, dense layers of hard scales appeared, and it couldn't move at all. His face turned cold and he waved his sleeve again. The gust of wind rose up and another loud sound was heard. The giant venomous serpent wailed as its bones were broken and its wings were broken. It fell from the cloud. The soaring serpent saw that the situation wasn't good. Before it could leave, the gust of wind had already entangled it. Wei Zihong just pretended to grab at the air and an invisible force squeezed him from all directions. With a wail, the soaring serpent was crushed to death. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1054. Feng Qingchang's protective black tortoise soul essence was already on the verge of shattering. At this moment, under the repeated attacks of the golden light, it finally collapsed. It turned into specks of spiritual light and flew away. The layer of protective treasure light was also quickly torn apart. He sighed and with a thought, hundreds of green feathers flew out from his body, each shining with a strange light. They fluttered and blocked the remaining rainbow lights. At this moment, the emerald bird flew back and turned back into a green-clothed girl. She looked at the dragon-shaped void chi surrounding Wei Zihong, pulled his sleeve, and said timidly, "Master, this person's magic power is hidden with the power of a dragon. Master, please take me and leave first." Feng Qingchang, however, remained unmoved and said with a firm tone, "There's no need to be afraid. Even though Sage Wei's Dao art is powerful, I can see that his astral qi can't reach far. Moreover, such a powerful art consumes quite a lot of magic power, so he definitely can't maintain it for a long time." Although he said that he had lost 3 strange beasts in a row. He had already used up more than half of his methods and he didn't have much to rely on. He checked the remaining spirit tablets and talismans on his body and found that there were still many left. He made up his mind. Wei Zihong's body abruptly felt lighter, and he'd escaped from the shackles of the heavens and the earth. He swept the surroundings with his gaze and saw that the bloody hole on the neck of the dark WM had already healed and new scales had grown out, so he shouted out in a low voice to summon the dark WM over. When the black flood dragon heard the call, it immediately turned into a black smoke and came to his feet. He took a step forward and landed on the head of the flood dragon. Then he leaped into the clouds and charged toward where Feng Chengchang was. The strange beasts released by this opponent were either injured or killed by him. At this moment, his momentum was at its weakest. He should go all out and defeat this person in one go. Feng Chengchang saw him coming over and took out a talisman. He crushed it in his hand and a magpie shadow appeared under his feet. The wings flapped and a strong wind was stirred up, sending him and the green-clothed girl into the sky. When Wei Zihong saw this, he shouted. The flood dragon below worked even harder and swung its body. It also increased its speed and chased closely behind. His eyes were firmly fixed on his opponent's back. Even if he couldn't catch up to him for a while, he had to maintain enough pressure to not give him any chance to catch his breath. Feng Chengchang saw that the profound light was getting closer and closer and said, Cui Exen, can you break through Sage Wei's layer of stellar energy? The green-clothed girl shook her head. Just now, among the three beasts, the soaring serpent was proficient in breaking spells, and even it could not do anything to the astral winds. She couldn't take it anymore. Feng Chengchang thought for a moment, then took out a foot-long crimson spike and said, then we can only use magic tools to break it. This item was called the Yin Crane Chisel, and it was personally refined by him using the sharp beak of a 1,000-year-old crane and numerous precious herbs and spirit materials. Since the day the treasure was formed, it had always been kept by its side to be nourished. He had never used any of the other offensive treasures because he was thinking about the day when he would become a heavenly abode, so that he could refine it into a true artifact. The green-clothed girl saw him take out this item and couldn't help but widen her eyes. She seriously said, Master, the treasure thorn won't be able to break that person's Fa Li. Feng Chengchang said, How would I not know? He circulated his qi and spat out 3 mouthfuls of pure vital qi. In a flash, the spikes spat out spiritual splendor, and there was a bright light that seemed to have become sharper. Seeing this, the girl in green was very anxious. She grabbed his hand and said, Master, please stop. This will hurt your foundation. Feng Chengchang said solemnly, Only then will there be a chance to break the opponent's Fa Li, otherwise how can we talk about winning? If I lose this time, even if I don't hurt my foundation, what can I do when I return to the sect? The green-clothed girl was startled and slowly let go of his hand. As someone by Feng Chengchang's side, how could she not know that the only thing the former hoped for was to improve his cultivation? If he lost this battle, not being able to save Hu Sanquan was secondary. Some people in the sect would definitely use this as an excuse to criticize him. Although it wouldn't shake his foundation, it would be impossible for him to enter the heavenly abode again. While the two of them were talking, Wei Zihong had already shortened the distance between them. He retracted the astral wind on his body and the golden pellet on top of his head crackled and golden lightning struck again. Feng Chengchang was already on guard. He took out a white jade feather fan and lightly waved it, dispersing the attacking lightning without a trace. However, a lot of the feather in the fan flew away, making it look smaller. At the same time, he said, Cui Exen, cover for me. The green-clothed girl heard him and lightly shouted. She transformed into the body of a kingfisher and shot out. She was 1,000 feet away in an instant. Wei Zihong's eyes turned and he slapped his hand. The kingfisher suddenly felt danger and all the feathers on its body stood up. It actually chirped and flapped its wings to fly up. Just now she dodged. An invisible astral wind swept from below and a dull echo came from the atmosphere. It startled the kingfisher into chirping and flew back to where Feng Chengchang was as if it was escaping. Wei Zihong saw that it was difficult to catch it again, so he no longer paid attention to it. This life-transforming art was indeed as the opponent expected. It consumed a lot of spiritual power, but this cultivation method seemed to be very compatible with his own cultivation method. Along the way, he had never encountered any difficulties. It was even smoother than cultivating the Xian Core Chaoyan. He had already practiced it to the point where he could freely release and retract it. Feng Chengchang took advantage of the time when the Kingfisher attacked the opponent and took the opportunity to quench the Yin Crane Chisel with his Qi essence. With a stroke, it turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared into the air, ready to be used as a killing move at a critical moment. With another wave of his hand, 4 talismans flew out. A burst of spiritual light flashed and 4 green flood dragons flew out. However, their figures were illusory and real at the same time. They all had the appearance of spiritual essence. Seeing this, the inky flood dragon seemed to be stimulated. With a loud roar, it rushed forward and tore at it. Wei Zihong didn't pay attention to it. He raised his sleeve and 3 silver pellets shot forward. Feng Chengchang waved the feather fan and fanned it down. However, the fan became smaller. He looked around and found that he had already flown to a place full of cliffs. Although this place was full of high mountains and dangerous peaks, which was not conducive for him to move around, he did it on purpose. He didn't have many methods left. Whether it was a head-on attack or flying around, he couldn't win against the opponent. So he could only use a strange strategy. He whispered a few words and the Kingfisher let out a loud cry. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky, ready to charge. Wei Zihong's eyes were slightly vigilant, and there was a hint of annoyance. He had experienced the attacks of this spirit bird several times, but it flew too fast and was extremely alert and flexible. If not for the fact that he couldn't find an opportunity, he would have killed it long ago. Feng Chengchang took advantage of his unwillingness. He lowered his sleeves and silently threw out several talismans. Then he flapped his wings and used a mountain as a cover. Then he dodged to the back. Wei Zihong saw that in the blink of an eye, he had lost sight of the opponent. He looked around. He wasn't going to follow the opponent's path. Earth energy surged from his body and he pressed forward, smashing the cliff in front of him and passing through the rubble. About 10 miles away from where the two were fighting, Feng Xin was lying on a small bird, watching the battle from afar. Just now, Feng Chengchang had ordered him to hide here. No matter what happened, he was not allowed to come out. However, the more he watched, the more shocked he became. He thought, not good, senior martial brother Feng doesn't seem to be this person's opponent. Why is it like this? If senior martial brother Feng is defeated, what should I do? If even Feng Chengchang was defeated, no matter how much Huang Yugong liked him, he would have to give the sect an explanation. He was extremely anxious. He was thinking about how he could help Feng Chengchang, but he was just a mystic light realm cultivator. Right now, 2 Yuanying cultivators were fighting. He couldn't even get close, let alone interfere. Thoughts flashed through his mind. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He clapped his hands and said, "I got it." He took out the 10,000 beast collar and shook it in his hand. With a flash of light, a metal winged eagle was released. However, he looked dull and lifeless. He had taken this eagle from Yan Xiaoyang, but because it was loyal to the original owner, it wasn't willing to submit to him. It didn't even want to eat the food that Nanhua sect fed it. Thus, under Hu Sanchuan's suggestion, Nanhua used a forbidden technique to tame it. Although this eagle's intelligence would be damaged and it wouldn't be able to progress any further, he felt that when he reached the Yuanying realm, he would get better spiritual beasts. As long as he could order it around, he agreed. At this point, he could easily order it around. This metal-winged eagle was comparable to a Yuanying spiritual master. He thought that if he charged over when the two of them were fighting, he would be able to disrupt the situation. Maybe Feng Chengchang would be able to give him a chance. He shouted and patted the eagle's head a few times. The eagle flapped its wings and flew into the air. It didn't make a sound as it flew into the valley. At the same time, on the other side of the mountain, Hans Wuching was riding on the astral cloud and coming over. He also saw the flashes of light in front of him and thought that the people from Blue Feather Pavilion were fighting with the people from Southern Flower Sect, so he increased his speed and wanted to rush over to help. But when he got closer and saw the scene below, he was shocked. He said, "It's Senior Martial Brother Wei? Who is that person? He looks like a cultivator who cultivated to Dharma body." He looked for a while and decided to help. He was only at the first Yuanying realm. With his magic power, he couldn't do anything to a third-realm cultivator. However, he had the jade book that Zhang Yan gave him, so he had some confidence. He pressed down on the cloud and dived down. He wanted to find a chance to attack. The two streaks of light flew away. Feng Chengchang circled around the cliff. He didn't want to fight with Wei Zihong head-on. The latter knew that with this kind of roaming technique, it was possible to fight for a few days. At the moment, he had a higher chance of winning, so he didn't show any impatience. He followed behind Wei Zihong and fought with his magic power from time to time. After the two of them fought for a full hour, Feng Chengchang once again turned around the top of a mountain full of hard rocks. He had done this many times before. When Wei Zihong was about to follow, he suddenly felt something strange. He looked up and saw a big eagle rushing down. This eagle was still hovering about 10 miles away. He was sure that it wasn't released by his opponent. He didn't know why it treated him as an opponent. However, its magic power was weak, so he didn't put it in his eyes. The golden pill on top of his head rolled and smoke surged, drowning the eagle. However, at this moment, there was a loud noise. The stone wall on the side suddenly broke apart. A big eagle with an iron jaw rushed out. Its teeth were like pincers, aiming at his head and clamping down. Because the earth puppets were very stealthy and there was no sign of them, Wei Zihong didn't sense them. When he discovered them, they were already very close. It was too late to dodge, so he used the myriad origin transformation technique to protect himself. That big centipede closed its jaws, but it couldn't chew. It coiled its body and tightly wrapped around him. At the same time, another big centipede rushed out from the mountain wall and also wrapped around him. Wei Zihong wanted to break free, but his hands and feet were tied and he couldn't use his Xian Qi. Feng Chengchang hesitated. He didn't know where the iron-winged eagle came from, but it wasn't released by his family. If he attacked now, it would be a bit unfair. But just now, his plan had been exposed. If he didn't attack now, then there would be no chance of victory. Therefore, his face became fierce and he didn't hesitate anymore. He pointed downwards and the Yin crane chisel that was hidden in the air suddenly appeared and stabbed down. But when it hit the invisible stellar qi, the magical weapon could only penetrate halfway and couldn't go any further. It just kept whistling and trembling. Feng Chengchang's expression couldn't help but change. He didn't think that the Yin crane chisel that he had high hopes for would be useless. He looked at Wei Zihong again. At this moment, the stellar qi around him was surging and the two big eagles couldn't restrain him anymore. He gritted his teeth and spat out several mouthfuls of yuan qi. The long needle swayed and went a little deeper. It was just a little bit away from piercing the opponent's head. At this moment, Wei Zihong suddenly raised his head and the divine eye on his forehead opened. There was a flash of light in the sky. At this moment, Feng Chengchang couldn't help but be distracted and his movements slowed. Wei Zihong took advantage of this opportunity and shouted. He opened his hands and scattered the two big earthworm souls. Then he swung his sleeve and threw out dozens of thunder pearls. The emerald bird shrieked and turned into a girl in green. She opened her hands and came up to block in front of her. Feng Chengchang had already woken up from his stupor. Seeing her like this, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Cui Exin." Seeing that she didn't dodge at this moment, if she was hit, she would definitely die. He turned into a beam of light and went past her to take the initiative to meet the thunder pearls. As the thunder roared in the air, his Dharma body also turned into ashes. In a cave dozens of miles away, a spirit snake that was lying there suddenly woke up. From its mouth, wisps of clear smoke slowly condensed into a human figure. As the figure became clearer and clearer, the snake also seemed to have dried up and its body shriveled up. In the end, only an empty skin was left. Feng Chengchang opened his eyes and stood firmly on the ground. He said, "This battle isn't over yet. If I rush over now, as long as I'm careful, Wei Zihong will definitely be unprepared. Who knows, I might still have a chance of winning." He shook his sleeves and headed outside. However, before he could leave the cave, he saw a Taoist in a luxurious robe flying towards him. As if sensing his gaze, this person also looked over. However, when he saw it was him, A look of fear appeared on his face. Feng Chengchang frowned. Just now, he was still alive, so his senses weren't very sensitive. Otherwise, he would have sensed this person the moment he entered the range of his seal of heaven and earth. Because he didn't want Wei Zihong to find out that he was still alive, he stretched out his hand and surged his transcendence energy, wanting to take this person down. However, the person opposite him took out a jade scroll in panic and opened it in front of him. Boundless yellow light surged out from it. Originally, Feng Chengchang didn't care about the other person, but when he sensed the vast transcendence energy coming from the yellow light, his expression couldn't help but change greatly. He leaped up and wanted to find a way to rush out of this place. However, before he could move, the yellow light had already caught up to him. For a moment, his body felt like a heavy mountain. With a plop, he fell solidly on the ground and couldn't move anymore. Chapter 129. The Twin Snakes Survive Calamity. Chapter 1055. Seeing that Feng Chengchang was restrained, Han Zhuqing quickly took out a bottle of pill water from his sleeves and poured it on Feng Chengchang's avatar. He then used a talisman to suppress it, only then did he relax. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and released a few formation flags to temporarily seal this area. Then, he came out to find Wei Zihong. Just now, when the Jade Scroll was released, the mana surged. Wei Zihong also felt it and was rushing over. As he turned to the top of a mountain, he sensed someone coming over. Taking a look, he realized it was his own disciple, Han Zhuqing. Unwittingly, he smiled and said, "Junior brother, you've arrived." Seeing him, Han Zhuqing quickly came over. Out of everyone in the sect, only this senior apprentice brother had a good relationship with him. Plus, he had the title of Elder Yao Yin, so he bowed deeply and said, "Greetings, senior apprentice brother. I was only able to leave the mountain because of Master's permission." Wei Zihong teased, "Sister-in-law has been waiting for you. Junior apprentice brother, why aren't you going back to the back of the house?" Hearing this, Han Zhuqing knew that Blue Feather Pavilion was fine. He relaxed and said, "Senior apprentice brother. Just now, I used the jade book that Master gave me to capture someone. From the looks of it, he seems to be the person that fought with senior apprentice brother not long ago." Wei Zihong's expression became serious. Just now, junior apprentice brother was the one who caused the change in power. "Where is that person now? Quickly take me there." Han Zhuqing agreed and led him to the entrance of the cave. He removed the 4 restrictions and used his supernatural power to grab the still unconscious Feng Chengchang out. At this moment, chirping sounds came from above. The two looked up and saw that it was the emerald bird circling above, but it didn't dare to come down. 20 miles away, Fang Xin and saw that Feng Chengchang was actually captured and knew that the situation was bad. He patted the big crane under him and quickly slipped away. Wei Zihong seemed to sense something and turned his head to look over. Seeing that it was just a mystic light realm cultivator, he didn't care. He looked back at Feng Chengchang and thought, "This person's avatar was clearly destroyed by my lightning bead, but he can still appear here. He should have used some sort of death substitution technique. Just now, he's trying to ambush me. If I'm not careful, he might succeed." He pondered for a moment and said, "Junior brother, wake him up." Han Zhuqing hesitated for a moment, then did as he was told. Feng Chengchang slowly woke up. Seeing the 2 people in front of him, he subconsciously struggled. However, he discovered that his magic power was suppressed, so he could only sigh. Wei Zihong said, "Fellow Taoist, although you fell into the hands of my junior brother, we haven't truly decided the victor between us. How about we call it a draw?" Feng Chengchang struggled in his heart and sighed. "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to say that. Just now, that iron-winged eagle appeared halfway. That gave me an advantage, but I didn't stop. I'm truly ashamed. Since I've been captured, I've lost. How can I have the face to make peace?" Wei Zihong nodded and said, "In that case, how about fellow Taoist Feng come to my Yaoying clan and rest for a few days?" Feng Chengchang was different from the cultivators who were captured before. He was someone who cultivated the Yuanying Dharma body. Nanhua sect definitely wouldn't allow him to be detained by their people for a long time. They didn't imprison him in Bu Pavilion because they were afraid that if trouble came, this place wouldn't be able to defend against it. However, the Yaoyin clan was different. It was in a small realm. Even if Taoist Paradise Realm Master came, he wouldn't be able to find the entrance to the realm. Moreover, there was the mountain guarding formation in the mountain, which was enough to defend against enemies. Feng Chengchang said calmly, "Just now, since we've made an agreement, I'll naturally let fellow Taoists do as you please." He then looked up at the sky and said, "Chui Exe, I'm fine here. You can go back first." The emerald bird could tell that Wei Zihong didn't have the intention to take his life. It chirped twice and flew east. Wei Zihong smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Feng, you've wronged me." He waved his sleeve, and a gust of strong wind moved Feng Chengchang onto the back of the black flood dragon. He then said to Han Zhuqing, "Junior brother, I'll return to the Yaoyin clan first. I'll return after I've settled fellow Taoist Feng down." Han Zhuqing bowed and said, "Senior brother, do as you please." Wei Zihong stepped on the flood dragon's head, and the black flood dragon soared into the clouds. In a short while, it disappeared into the wilderness. After Feng Xin and left Bu Pavilion, he fled all the way back to the mountain gate. However, at this moment he was panicking. Before he could think of how to get past the stage, he saw a Taoist boy standing in front of his cave abode. He recognized that it was the boy who accompanied his teacher, and his expression tensed up. "Junior brother, why are you here?" The boy said happily, "Senior brother, you're back. Old master ordered me to call you over." Feng Xin An's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to calm down. "Has master come out of seclusion?" The boy replied respectfully, "Yes, master came out of seclusion this morning." Feng Xin said, "You go back first, I'll be there in a while." The boy bowed, got onto the back of a sparrow, and flew away. Feng Xin returned to the cave abode, and he paced a few rounds on the spot, feeling extremely uneasy. He thought to himself, could it be that master already knows about that matter? However, even Feng Chengchang had been killed by a bird, and it was only a matter of time before Huang Yugong found out about it. He knew that he could not avoid it, so he sighed and changed into a set of Taoist robes. He left the cave abode, stepped on the mysterious light, and headed towards the engraved cloud peak where the Tsangding Grotto heaven was. He was usually very flamboyant when he walked in the sect, but today he was much more restrained. He flew slowly along the way, and many of his fellow disciples who were familiar with him were very surprised. After flying for 2 minutes, he arrived at the top of a green peak. There was a large jade archway, and it was the entrance to the Tsangding Grotto heaven. There were 2 30-feet-tall strongmen guarding the entrance, and behind them, there was a fierce striped tiger with the body of an elephant. They were lying lazily on the ground, but when they saw Feng Xin coming over, they suddenly flipped over and stared at him, as if they could pounce and bite him at any time. Feng Xin, however, did not care about them. He got down from the cloud and went straight to the archway. Just now, when he stepped onto the stone steps, the strong man at the entrance stopped him and said, "Master Feng, please wait." Feng Xin stopped in his tracks and looked at him coldly. "What's the meaning of this? Don't you know who I am?" The strong man bowed at him and said in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, "Master Feng, please forgive me. This is Jinren's instruction. For the next 2 days, no one is allowed to pass through the formation door. Please change to another door." If it was any other time, Feng Xin would definitely make a fuss, but he was not in the mood at the moment. He scoffed, walked to the side, and released a large condor. The Tsangding Grotto heaven was on the cloud above his head, and if he did not use the formation door, he could just ride a mount up. But just as he was about to flip over and get on the back of the condor, the strong man walked over and pulled the reins and said, "Master Feng, Jinren has said that humans are not allowed to ride spiritual birds into the gate." Feng Xin was furious and said, "No left, no right. No right either. How do you expect me to go up?" The strong man pointed to a distance and said, "Master can just use that soft ladder that is suspended in the air." Feng Xin followed his gaze and saw that it was a soft ladder made of straw ropes. It rose from the peak of the mountain and then floated up into the sky before disappearing into the depths of the clouds. It was just that it was abnormally thin and looked like it could be broken by a strong gust of wind. Looking at this scene, his expression couldn't help but change. He knew that this soft ladder was personally refined by Huang Yugong, and any cultivator below the grotto heaven would immediately lose their mana if they touched it and could only obediently climb up. If they fell from the sky, they would really fall to their death. Especially since this item was originally used to test a disciple's Tao heart, and now he was being asked to climb it. It was obvious that he was being punished. At this moment he had already guessed it. Huang Yugong must have found out about what happened at Bu Pavilion. But now that things had come to this, he wasn't as terrified as before, and tried to breathe a few times. He walked in front of the soft ladder, and grabbed it tightly with both hands. He slowly climbed up section by section. This time, he climbed for 10 days and 10 nights. But at this time, the top of the clouds was still out of reach, as if there was no end to the road ahead. Because he didn't have mana to support him, and he needed to constantly stabilize his body so that he wouldn't be blown away by the hurricane in the sky, he was already at his limit. After climbing a bit more, his vision turned black, and he lost consciousness. His hands went limp, and he fell from the sky. When he woke up again, he realized that he was lying on a stone bed. Above him, there was a bright pearl hanging, and it was bright and soft. There was an incense burner beside him, and the smoke curled up in spirals. With a sniff, he felt his head clear. He slowly propped himself up and looked around. He was in a stone residence with simple decorations. A few feet away, a white parrot stood on a golden pole and said to him, "Master said that if Feng Langjun wakes up, you can go see him." Feng Xin and calmed himself down, and tidied his clothes a little, and walked out. He walked along a spring, and arrived at a big hall. When he looked up, he saw an elegant, tall, and skinny Daoran sitting on a jade altar high up. His body trembled, and he immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed, saying, "This sinner greets my master." Huang Yugong's voice came from above and said, "Oh, what have you done wrong?" Feng Xin and repeatedly kowtowed and said, "This sinner shouldn't have provoked others for no reason, and caused Hu Shixiang and Feng Shixiang to be captured." Huang Yugong shook his head and said, "You still haven't thought it through." Feng Xin and knelt on the ground, and didn't dare to move, but his body trembled slightly, and it was obvious that he was extremely afraid. Huang Yugong sighed. He had always been very lenient towards his own disciples. Although he wanted to punish Feng Xin, and when he was in front of him, he couldn't bear to do it, and said, "Just now, you have walked the heaven stairway, and it can be considered as a death sentence. There is no need to talk about what happened before." Feng Xin and raised his head in surprise. Huang Yugong said coldly, "I haven't finished." Feng Xin and quickly lowered his head again. "From today onwards, you are to cultivate in the sect, and without my permission, you are not allowed to go out. Otherwise, you can get out of the sect." Feng Xin and let out a sigh of relief, and a feeling of being reborn after a disaster arose in his heart. He kowtowed heavily and said, "This disciple obeys." Huang Yugong waved his hand, and Feng Xin and felt as if he was pardoned. He kowtowed again, and then left. Watching the disciple leave, Huang Yugong thought for a moment, and then said to the boy beside him, "Go and invite spiritual Master Yuan here." After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, a scarlet feather floated into the cave, and landed on the praying mat in front of him, and then transformed into Yuan Chi Wang. He bowed and said, "Brother Yugong, why did you summon me here?" Huang Yugong returned the greeting and said, "I won't hide it from Brother Yuan Chi. A few days ago, a disciple of my sect had a dispute with Blue Feather Pavilion, but later on, a disciple of Bright Nether Lake intervened, and I and several disciples of our alliance were captured." Yuan Chi Wang raised his eyelids and asked in a deep voice, "Who was captured from my sect?" Huang Yugong said, "It was my sect's disciples, Hu Sanquan and Feng Qingqing." Yuan Chi Wang looked up and asked, "What happened?" Huang Yugong gave a rough account of what happened. Hearing this, Yuan Chi Wang frowned and said, "This is not easy to deal with. What does Brother Yugong want to do? If it was only Hu Sanquan, they could suppress this matter for now, and then slowly find a solution. But there was a third-degree cultivator among them, and they couldn't pretend to be deaf and mute. If they mishandled this matter, the Southern Flower sect would lose all face. Huang Yugong said, "If I go to talk to a junior, it will be beneath my status, so I want to talk to Spiritual Master Zhang." Yuan Chi Weng was surprised and said, "Brother Yugong wants to go to Qinsong School?" Huang Yugong shook his head and said, "No. In another half a month, it will be Spiritual Master Yuling's ascension ceremony, and he has invited fellow cultivators from all sects to attend the ceremony. I heard that Spiritual Master Zhang is among them, and I want to meet him at that time." Yuan Ziwang stroked his beard and said, "In the Celestial Palace, since I, Nanhua, am on Yuxiao's side, I am not on the same side as the Yinsong sect. Zhenren Zhang might not give me face." Huang Yugong nodded and said, "I know this, so if I go, I don't hope to resolve this matter, but to discuss justice with him." Yuan Chi Weng's eyelids twitched, and he looked at Huang Yugong with surprise and said, "Dao friend, it is not easy for us to cultivate, so do not act rashly." Huang Yugong shook his head and said, "But if I don't stand up for my disciples and admit defeat, once this matter spreads out, the Southern Flower sect's reputation among the sects will plummet." Yuan Chi Weng didn't speak for a while, and after a long time he said, "That Spiritual Master Zhang is someone who can defeat Yan Changxing. If Dao friend fights with him, what are your chances of victory?" Huang Yugong laughed bitterly and said, "Dao friend is wrong. This time, I don't want to win but to fight." Yuan Chi Weng thought for a while, and finally understood what he meant. He couldn't help but sigh and said, "So that's how it is. Brother Yugong has put a lot of thought into this." This conflict might have been between the South Flower sect and Bright Nether Lake sect, but the source of it all came from Blue Feather Pavilion. If you learn of this, all of the South Flower sect will be mocked for not being able to control a low-level sect in the past. And now, Huang Yugong dragged the Qinsong school into this matter, and wanted to elevate the dispute between the Southern Flower sect and Biu Xian into a dispute between the Southern Flower sect and the Qinsong school. Even if they lost this battle, it wouldn't damage their sect's reputation, and they might even be praised by the Yuxiao sections. Huang Yu said, "That year, Spiritual Master Zhang fought with Yan Changxing, and he used up a lot of energy. It would be hard for him to improve his cultivation for at least 100 years. Since this battle, only a few decades have passed, and Spiritual Master Zhang has not fully recovered his power yet. It's not like I don't have a chance. Besides, even if I can't win, I can admit defeat early, and I won't lose too much of my cultivation. And this time, the disciples of the Taihao and Yuxiao sects are also captured, and I can be considered to be standing up for them. Since the two sects are allies, I believe they will do something about it." Yuan Chi Weng nodded and said, "So Brother Yugong has already thought this through, and I have worried too much." However, there was a hint of worry in his eyes. Although Huang Yugong had thought this through, if a dispute really started, it wouldn't be so easy to stop. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1056. Within the Truth Purification Hall, sword lights flickered. Countless sword chis shook the ocean, causing all the creatures in the inner realm to feel fear. Zhang Yan sat on the jade platform. With a thought, sword chis would revolve around him, and 5 colored light waves would revolve around him, shaking the heavens. Ever since he had refined the true killing sword, he had been comprehending the changes in it every day, in addition to cultivating and refining the magic treasures, so that he could increase its power a bit before the calamity came. The more he studied, the more he felt the changes within the sword were profound. He could not help but sigh. If the Shaoqing disciples obtained such a true sword and used it with their sword arts, their might would indeed be unstoppable. It was no wonder that they felt that it was enough to have one sword in their hands. However, the Shaoqing sect master, Yu Xianxiao, had once said that the path of the sword was different for everyone. He had his own techniques, which were different from the Shaoqing disciples who only had one sword. At the end of the day, this was only one of his many techniques. Even if this true sword was destroyed, it would not affect his cultivation. At this moment, Jing Yu's voice sounded from outside. Master, someone from the upper extreme hall is here. He's asking for an audience. With a thought from Zhang Yan, the thousands of sword lights flashed and hid in his acupoints. He said, "Call him in." Shortly after, a boy came in with a cup in his hands. There was an ancient jade scroll in the room. When he saw Zhang Yan, he presented the scroll with both hands and said respectfully, "Greetings to the Truth Purification Hall Master. The sect master has ordered me to deliver this to you." Zhang Yan glanced at it and knew what it was. He smiled and said, "Thank the sect master on my behalf." The boy placed the jade scroll on the table, then bowed and said, "Yes, I will take my leave." Zhang Yan picked up the jade scroll and flipped through it. It recorded the techniques of the various sects for the past tens of thousands of years. However, more importantly, there were notes left behind by the seniors of the sect, which detailed the methods to break them. These things were actually recorded in all three upper halls, but because the person who recorded them was different, they were different. He had already seen the Truth Purification Hall scroll. As for the Daylight Hall scroll, he had asked Huixian for a look. This scroll was held by the upper extreme hall and was personally written by the sect master. In the past, only the sect master could read it. However, in the face of the calamity, everyone's strength would increase, so there was no need to care about such rules. Because the four sects of Vast Sky, Southern Flower, Jade Sky, and Heaven Mending sect had clearly drawn a line of demarcation with the Dark Azure sect, he paid attention to these four sects first. The sound of footsteps could be heard. Jingyu entered the hall again and said in a low voice, "Master, Jinren Wei sent a letter saying that he has captured a disciple of Nan Hua who has cultivated Dharmakaya and has imprisoned him in the Yao Yin sect." Zhang Yan, eyes flickened. He put down the scroll and asked, "South Hua and Taihao clan?" Jingyu stooped down and replied, "I did not see any movements." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. A third-degree cultivator from the Nanhua clan was kidnapped. This was a matter of reputation, so there would definitely be some action. The quieter they were, the more it meant that they had something up their sleeves. However, unless they attacked the Yaoyin Mountain Gate, the rest would be to reason with him. With Taihao, Yu Xiao, and Mending Heaven's disciples involved, these three sects would not stand idly by. He thought for a while, raised his hand, and formed two letters. He said to Jingyu, "Take my letters and go to Ana Temple and Pingdu sect. Invite Jinren Wu and Jinren Pang to Qinsong for a while." Jingyu said yes, took the letters and left with a bow. Pingdu sect, Baiyun platform, Huijing cave. After Wu Wei returned from the heavenly palace, he cultivated in seclusion and had not come out since. Just as he was sitting, he suddenly heard a clear sound coming from the outside. It was coming into the cave, and he frowned. Before he went into seclusion, he was told not to ring the bell if there was nothing important. He said to the outside, "Quickly go and see why the bell is being rung outside." A boy outside the door responded and left in a hurry. After a while, a voice said, "Master, I heard that an envoy from Qinsong School has come to seek an audience with Zhenren, so the bell was rung." Wu Wei stroked his beard, but did not say whether he wanted to see them or not. After a while, he asked, "Did anything big happen in the continent recently?" The boy said, "Other than the ceremony of Zhenren Yuling's ascension in half a month, which is the fight between the Nanhua disciples and the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake, the rest are trivial matters." Wu Wei heard this and became interested. "Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake and Nanhua clan? What about now?" The boy said, "This time, it was Nanhua clan that suffered a small loss." He took out a bamboo scroll from his sleeve and said, "This is a report from a disciple of the lower sect. It's a record of this matter." Wu Wei's gaze shifted, and the bamboo scroll flew over and landed in his hand. After his spiritual sense entered it, he knew everything about the two clans. He couldn't help but think, Nanhua lost a third-stage disciple, they won't let it go. However, going up against the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake is equivalent to going up against the Qinsong School. With just one clan, they probably don't have enough confidence, so they will most likely seek help from Yu Xiao and Taihao clans. Now that Qinsong School is looking for me, could it be that they want me to join hands with them to fight against the enemy? If that's the case, should I go or not? He couldn't help but hesitate, and after thinking for a long time, he couldn't make up his mind, so he said, "Invite the envoy from Qinsong School to the pavilion first." The boy said, "Disciple obeys." Wu Wei sat down and closed his eyes. His consciousness sank, and after a short while, a ray of spiritual light flew up from the top, heading towards an illusory place. After a moment of absent-mindedness, when he opened his eyes again, he was already in a deep pagoda that had an unknown height difference. Counting carefully, there were 365 shrine seats, and in every seat, there was a statue of a god. They all had different faces, and divine qi enveloped their bodies. Their eyes were bright, and they leaped around, as if they were alive. At the top, there was no statue of a god, only 3 shrines, north, east, and west, and at this moment, he was sitting on the west seat. This was the Pingdu sect's most treasured magical treasure, the hidden spiritual pagoda. Every disciple that obtained the sect's true teachings had the right to invite a Dharma spirit to possess them. As their cultivation deepened, their rank would be higher. Just like Wu Wei himself, he started from the lowest level, and after countless trials and tribulations, he climbed all the way up. He said to the shrine seat on the east side, "Is Jinren Zhao here?" After asking a few times, there was a flash of golden light on the shrine seat, and suddenly, a Taoist in his 40s appeared. He said in a deep voice, "Jinren Wu, what's the matter?" Wu Wei said, "There's a difficult matter today. The sect leader is in seclusion, so I have to find Jinren Zhao to discuss it." Originally, this kind of matter could be decided by the Pingdu sect leader, but in order to deal with the great calamity, this sect leader was using all his strength to sense the pagoda, hoping to increase his cultivation by another level. Then, the matters outside could only be decided by the two of them. Jinren Zhao's expression turned serious, and he said, "Jinren Wu, please speak." Wu Wei explained the reason and his concerns. "If I agree to the Qinsong School this time, if there's a dispute, it will be difficult for me to stay out of it for the time being. However, if I don't agree, it will damage the friendship between our two sects, and it's really difficult for me to make a decision alone." The founder of the Pingdu sect was on good terms with the 4th-generation sect leader of the Qinsong School, and the 2 generations were connected by marriage. They had been friends for thousands of years. Although there were disagreements between the disciples of the 2 sects, they would always stand on the same side every time there was a major event. However, he felt that the Pingdu sect was closest to the Yuxiao school in the south. Previously in the Heavenly Palace, he had already disrespected them. This time, if he went along with them again, he was afraid that he would have to face the pressure of this sect alone. It was no wonder that he was so cautious. Although he was a perfected heavenly abode, he knew that the calamity was coming from the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth and the situation in the continent, but he did not know when it would happen. He could only wait for the calamity to happen passively, afraid that if he made a wrong choice, the sect would be destroyed. Jinren Zhao could not help but fall into deep thought. After a long time, he said in a deep voice, "I think we should go." Wu Wei said, "Can you tell me the reason?" Jinren Zhao said, "Shinren, you have been to the meeting of the Heavenly Palace. Do you remember that other than the Pingdu sect, the Huanjin Temple was also roped in by the Qinsong School? If they want to use us this time, they will not only invite us, but also the Huanjin Temple. If they go and I do not respond, they will definitely distance themselves from me, and it will be disadvantageous for the future calamity." Wu Wei thought for a while and felt that it made sense. If the Pingdu sect wanted to survive the calamity, they would still have to rely on the Qinsong School. In the past, it was only the Pingdu sect, so they could still control them, but now it was different. Jinren Zhao said again, "As for whether Yu Xiao will vent his anger on me, I think there is no need to be afraid. The day of Jinren Yuling's ascension is not far away. After he leaves in the southwest, only the Huanjin Temple and I will be the strongest. With our 2 sects as allies, what can others do to me?" Just now, Wu Wei had not thought of this. He thought for a while and nodded, "Not bad, not bad. It seems like we have to visit the Huanjin Temple more often in the future." Just as the two were discussing, thousands of miles away, Yuan Zhangqing stepped into the boundary of the Pingdu sect. He looked at the mountains and swamps in front of him and said, "I hope I can find the last medicine used to condense the elixir here." Ever since he came to Donghua, he had spent more than 20 years traveling all over the continent. Now, he had gathered the 3 internal medicines, but among the 3 external medicines, he had found the Qi Ganoderma. As for the Dilling Cave, he knew that it was a good place. However, the milk of tomorrow was not easy to gather, so it was mostly in the deep caves. Every time he found it, he would only get 1 or 2 drops, and it was not even of high quality. So now, more than half of it was still missing. However, during these years of traveling, he had also made some friends. Half a month ago, he received a letter from someone saying that there was a heavenly cavern with grains of sand in the southwest that produced high-quality milk of stone. So he came all the way here and wanted to explore it. He found a flat hill and landed. He shook his hand and released a talisman smoke into the sky. Then he sat down and waited. After half a day, a beam of light flew over from afar. On it stood a middle-aged cultivator dressed in bright clothes with a silk belt around his waist. He looked down and laughed. He landed and cupped his hands together. "Fellow Taoist Yuan, I just now had something to do, so I came late. Please forgive me." Yuan Zhangqing got up and returned the bow. "Fellow Taoist Wang, you're too polite. I came abruptly." Cultivator Wang said, "You're too kind. I won't hide it from you. The heavenly cavern with grains of sand that I mentioned was occupied by a few cultivators a few days ago. Their magic power is not weak. I was thinking of finding a few more fellow Taoists to go there." "Fellow Taoist, you came at the right time." Yuan Zhangqing nodded slightly. He didn't say anything more and asked directly, "Then when do we leave?" Cultivator Wang was startled. Then he smiled and said, "So fellow Taoist is anxious. All right, I'll take you to meet a few other Taoists. If they don't have any objections, then we can leave in 3 days at most." Yuan Zhangqing agreed. He hadn't returned to his sect yet, so his identity as a Qinsong school disciple wasn't useful yet. Moreover, this was his sect's territory. If he wanted to do things more conveniently, it would be useful to get to know a few more people. The two of them got on a beam of light and flew southeast. After walking for half a day, they landed in a city that occupied a large area. Cultivator Wang called out from outside. Not long after, several people came out to greet them. The one in front was wearing the uniform of Pingdu sect. Cultivator Wang transmitted his voice to Yuan Zhangqing. "This person is a disciple of Pingdu sect. His surname is Yu and his name is Boang. As long as he can gather the external medicine and condense the core, he will have a chance to invite a Dharma spirit to possess him. We mostly rely on this person to travel around here. However, this fellow Taoist loves to listen to flattery, so we can't offend him later." After saying that, he walked up and chatted with Yu Qing for a while. Then he introduced Yuan Zhangqing to everyone. After exchanging some polite greetings, Yuan Zhangqing followed everyone into the city. Then he found an opportunity to ask Cultivator Wang in private, "Since fellow Taoist Yu is a disciple of Pingdu, why did you go out to look for clear stone milk?" Cultivator Wang replied, "Fellow Taoist Yu's master was killed by a cultivator of the devil sect. He had many fellow disciples and didn't receive many benefits, so he had to find the external medicine himself. Fellow Taoist, don't worry, there are plenty of clear stone milk in the heavenly sand cave. You won't be missing out on your share." Yuan Zhangqing nodded. Just now, when he saw Yu Boang, he felt that there was something strange about this person, so he secretly paid attention to him. Over the next 2 days, a few more people came to this place. Every day, Yu Boang would hold a banquet to entertain them. Sometimes he would even generously give out medicinal pills, which made him quite popular. On the 5th day, it was finally time to set off. Yuan Zhangqing and the others rode on a beam of light and headed toward the heavenly sand cave. After walking for a few hours, they saw a huge pit below them. The stone walls were covered with vines. On the west side, there was a cave that was about 6 zhang high. Crimson smoke billowed out from it. At the top of the cave, there was a river that flowed with a waterfall. The water that flowed down was all poured into the cave, and there was no sign of overflowing. It was obvious that the cave was incomparably deep. Yu Boang pointed down and said, "This is the Heavenly Sand Cave. My senior brother found the clear stone milk here, but the last time I came here, this place was occupied by a few rude and unreasonable cultivators. They insisted that this was their home, so I had to leave when I was alone." Cultivator Wang said, "Fellow Taoist Yu, with so many of us here, do we still need to be afraid of these two? If they don't know what's good for them, we'll just kick them out." Yu Boang laughed and said, "I was just about to rely on everyone. Once I find the clear stone milk, I'll definitely need everyone's help." After he said this, everyone loudly agreed. Yu Boang waved his hand, and everyone followed him inside. Only Yuan Jiangqing deliberately stayed a step behind. At this moment, there were two beautiful female cultivators sitting in the depths of the cave. Each of them held two translucent eggs in their arms, but upon closer inspection, one could see that there was a child sleeping while hugging his knees. One of the female cultivators suddenly raised her head and said with joy, "Senior sister, that Yu Boang has lured a blood meal here again." The other female cultivator made a hand seal and sensed for a moment, then said with satisfaction, "This person did a good job. Once we devour the souls of these 10 or so people, we'll be able to improve our cultivation. When that time comes, we can go to the spirit cave to cultivate." Our 1152, you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.